Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. US President Trump threatens Russia with fresh sanctions if they don't do a deal with Ukraine. Trump also weighs up a 10% import tariff on China over his concerns of fentanyl use. A Turkish ski resort fire claims the lives of 76 people, whilst 9 others are detained over safety concerns. And 9 people have died as the Deep South faces a deep freeze. To our top story, and US President Donald Trump, who's just 3 days into the job, continues to make his mark. He's due to make an address at the World Economic Forum in Davos any moment now. But earlier in the day, he was back on social media, calling out Russia and a cathedral bishop for a service he attended with his family in Washington yesterday. Let's get the latest from our Washington correspondent, Caroline Malone. Caroline, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Trump is due to speak at the Davos summit any moment now, but he's been using Truth Social to bring us his latest thoughts. Let's start with Russia. He's threatening sanctions on Russian goods if Putin doesn't end the war with Ukraine. Can you tell us any more?
Yes, absolutely. So among the statements that President Trump has been making, as you say, is relating to trying to end the war between Ukraine and Russia. And as part of a wider statement, he's been saying, without a deal, without getting to a peace deal between those countries, then I will have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. So really a threat there, not just to essentially sanction Russia, but others that might be involved and taking part in this war with Ukraine. He said as part of his campaign all along that he wants to end the war with Ukraine. He said he would do it on, quote, day one. Clearly, he hasn't been able to do that. That was somewhat of an impossibility. But it does seem to be high on his agenda, potentially for the first 100 days. A lot of analysts have been looking at how he might do that. And, you know, on the agenda is Donald Trump speaking directly, potentially, to President Putin of Russia. We know in the past that's something that they've been able to do when he was the last president in the last Trump administration. They spoke on the phone, and that's something they are potentially looking at meeting in person, we understand, to try and come to some peace talks. So look, this is all part of really potentially Trump's wider campaign of maybe even using the threat of sanctions, the threat of tariffs, to try and be in a stronger position when he gets to the table and when he tries to get a deal bashed out between Russia and Ukraine, using that kind of economic leverage to get the people he wants to agree on something.
Putin's not the only one to feel Trump's wrath today. He's asked the bishop who conducted yesterday's cathedral service to apologise, calling her a radical, hardline Trump hater. Can you tell us why?
So President Trump and other officials and family members attended a service at the Washington National Cathedral just yesterday. And in that service, the bishop spoke in her sermon about asking basically President Trump to extend grace to the people who might be impacted by his policies. And specifically, she referenced how not all immigrants to the United States are criminals, how the vast majority are good, hardworking people, and to consider how they must be feeling at this time, and particularly those who might be feeling scared. Really an appeal on a religious grounds, it appears, to Donald Trump, to his administration, to J.D. Vance, who is sitting next to him, or to people down from him on the front rows of the pews in the church, to really have some sympathy, ultimately, have some empathy with the people who are going to be impacted by his policies. You know, in videos that were shown both of the bishop and of President Trump and Vice President Vance, they are paying attention to what the bishop is saying, and they are sort of staring back at her. At one moment, Vance and Trump look at each other, are clearly sort of potentially, not happy with what she said. And Trump comes out afterwards and says basically he didn't think it was a particularly interesting service. But obviously, she's touched a nerve, this bishop, in trying to point out to the Trump administration, to point out directly to President Trump that there are good, hardworking immigrants in the United States, even if they don't have the right paperwork, and that under religious reasons, it would be good to extend grace to them.
Yes, indeed. And the Justice Department have ordered prosecutors to investigate state and city officials if they refuse to carry out President Trump's immigration policies. How will this be enforced?
So what we are expecting to happen really any hour or day now is that the immigration, the customs and enforcement groups are likely to go into some select cities of the United States and carry out deportation raids. They have highlighted that's something they are going to do. It's been spoken about by President Trump, and also his border czar, talking about trying to get rid of illegal immigrants in the United States. They've talked a lot about criminal illegal immigrants in the United States, but the feeling is that this could actually impact a much wider group of people, those without the correct paperwork, even if they are people with jobs and who pay taxes and have, an established life in the United States. There are also what's called sanctuary cities in the United States. There are areas where immigrants are particularly well protected. So President Trump's administration is talking, I think, specifically about when these raids happen, when people move in from the ICE group to try and deport people. If anyone gets in the way, then he's encouraging legal sides of those states, so the state attorneys and others, to then take action against them. So really warning anyone not to disrupt this process, because he is essentially saying there will be some legal follow-up to that if they do.
Caroline Malone in Washington, thank you so much. Staying with President Trump now, who said his threat to hit China with 10% tariffs on all imports was still on the table and indicated it could come as soon as next month. He says it's because fentanyl is being sent from China to the US via Mexico and Canada. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping and emphasized their close ties yesterday. Laura Westbrook has more.
This video call between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping took place just hours after Donald Trump was sworn in. The two leaders reportedly chatted for 90 minutes on a video call, with President Xi saying that the partnership with Putin remains strong. Putin, meanwhile, called Xi a dear friend and said China and Russia were building ties despite external pressure. Now, these two leaders established this no-limits relationship in 2022, weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine, and have grown closer ever since. Now, neither side mentioned Trump in statements released after the call, and Putin's foreign affairs advisor Yuri Ushakov told reporters that the call had been planned in advance and was not connected with Trump's inauguration. But he also said that both leaders expressed a readiness to develop ties with Washington. Now, Trump has threatened tariffs on Beijing and warns there would be big trouble for Moscow if a deal to end the war in Ukraine is not reached. Some analysts believe Beijing could offer Trump help by using its influence on Russia in resolving the war in Ukraine. And on Friday, Trump spoke to Chinese President Xi Jinping, reportedly discussing trade, fentanyl and TikTok, but Putin has yet to talk to Trump. Now, Trump also said during an event at the White House that he was still considering putting a 10% tariff on imports from China on February the 1st. And this does repeat a threat that he made on the campaign trail. He vowed to implement 60% tariffs for all goods imported from China. And he later threatened to impose an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods unless Beijing does more to stop the flow of the drug fentanyl. And that's not good for China. Its economy is slowing, and so it signaled a willingness to do a deal to avoid those tariffs. China's foreign ministry said on Wednesday that Beijing was willing to maintain communication with the US to handle differences. A spokeswoman said that China believes there is no winner in a trade war, but China would safeguard its interests. And earlier, we also heard from a top Chinese official, Ding Weixing. He's the vice premier, and he was speaking in Davos. He said that his country was looking for a win-win solution to trade tensions and that he wanted to expand its imports, although he did not mention the US by name. Now, on Monday, Trump ordered an investigation into Chinese trade practices, but held off on announcing any new tariffs. Some analysts are seeing it as a bit of a softer tone from Trump towards China and say it's rekindled hope in Beijing that negotiations might be possible to avert a second trade war.
Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong, thank you. Let's get into this further with economist Laurie Laird. Laurie, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Good evening.
Now, despite the aggressive talk, the 10% tariff would actually be much less than the 60% tariff Donald Trump mentioned on the campaign trail. So is China breathing a sigh of relief today?
I think a little bit, and I think also that China will be very pleased to see that the vice premier or the vice president had a real seat of honor at the inauguration, where a number of Europeans would have loved to have been that close to the action on Monday. So I think that does give Chinese corporates a little bit of hope that perhaps Trump may climb down on some of his promises. His promises were vague anyway, right? He talked about 60%, then he talked about additional tariffs on China above some amount that had been unmentioned. So his attitude toward China has been a little unclear. What is clear is that the first countries to be in his sights have been Canada and Mexico, right? And he's talked about imposing tariffs there as soon as the 1st of February. So it does seem that China has got a bit of a reprieve. That said, the Chinese markets today were pretty grim. Most of the major stock market indices down about 1%, which goes against what was happening in the rest of Asia, where we saw a bit of a rally in all the other markets, Korea and Japan. So a little bit of caution, I think, from Chinese corporates, Chinese investors.
Tariffs are a really important part of Trump's economic plans. He believes they can boost growth, protect jobs, and also raise tax revenue. But is this actually the reality of tariffs?
Remember, tariff is one of the most beautiful words, right? That was part of Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric. This is absolutely remarkable because the people that pay tariffs are U.S. business. Well, any U.S. or U.S. domiciled business that is bringing in exports from another place. That's where the money comes from. And in fact, it tends to come almost on a direct debit. So if you're a car company working in the U.S. and you want imported steel, whatever the tariff is, let's say 20%, that is paid usually by direct debit from the importing company's bank account. That's remitted to the U.S. government. So it's not a faceless foreign company that is paying this tariff. It's actually a U.S. importer, which often, given all the we have a large body of economic evidence here, ultimately passes that cost on to the consumer. So this is quite a remarkable campaign promise from Donald Trump, because one of his mandates was to fight inflation, right? He's managed to convince American voters that he's going to impose tariffs, which could be inflationary, yet convince them that this is a really good thing. Utterly remarkable. But most economists believe that tariffs will ultimately be inflationary and not in the benefit of U.S. consumers.
Earlier today, Trump threatened Russia with taxes, tariffs and sanctions if a deal is not made to settle what he has called this ridiculous war. What does it mean for Russia, who's already economically isolated, and that we know?
Yeah, interesting. This was a post on Truth Social that came out a couple of hours ago that you've mentioned. Really convoluted post. I had to read it a couple of times to figure out what Donald Trump meant. But it seemed to be a threat to further sink the Russian economy if Vladimir Putin doesn't come to the negotiating table. Now, interesting ploy. a number of Russian officials have come out, including the head of the central bank, have come out and said, look, the Russian economy is in very poor shape. About 40% of the budget is devoted to military spending. But you have to remember that Vladimir Putin doesn't have to face things like free and fair elections. His electorate, despite the fact his electorate may be suffering, he's not really, doesn't have to be aware of those concerns. I suspect that Russia will continue to find homes for its LNG, its liquefied natural gas. In fact, a lot of it's going to the EU right now. The EU bought more LNG in the first 3 weeks of January than it has in any 3 weeks of January on record. So that some of those exports, despite the existing sanctions, are still finding homes. Now, I suspect that Donald Trump will say to the European Union, look, if you want to avoid tariffs on your goods, you got to find a way to stop buying that Russian gas. Can Russia reroute that gas to more friendly countries like China, like India? It's possible, although most of that gas is coming from a refinery that's not particularly convenient for Asia. But Russia has found ways, because it has this scarce resource that has gas, it has found ways to reroute this. So I'm not sure how effective those threats may be.
Economist Laird, fantastic insights. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
My pleasure.
To Turkey now, where the country is marking a national day of mourning after a fire ripped through a ski resort in the Bolu Mountains. 76 people, including children, died following the blaze at the Grand Kartal Hotel, and police have detained 9 people, including the owner of the hotel. Questions are now being raised about the building's safety measures. Let's go live to Istanbul to speak to the foreign news editor of NTV, Sare Selvi Ozturk. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Firstly, what can you tell us about the safety measures which are being investigated?
And officials here are saying that the hotel fire in the ski resort in Turkey's Bolu Mountains is being investigated in great detail. But there are big questions about whether the hotel's fire system were properly inspected, because the major conflict that we have seen today in Turkey is who checks the hotel's fire safety. Because the mayor of Bolu, Tanju Özcan, said that the Ministry of Tourism was responsible as the hotel was beyond boundary of his town. And the mayor also said the last time Bolu municipality had given a report stating the hotel was fireproof was in 2007, and there had been no such checks since then. And on the other hand, we have had Culture and Tourism Minister Mehmet Nur Ersoy saying today, hotel did have a fire competence certificate issued by the fire department, which is under the control of Bolu municipality, and the inspections were down to them. And today also, what's more interesting that an official document issued by the Bolu municipality has been circulating on Turkish TV bulletins and social media. This very document shows that the Bolu Municipality Fire Department has given approval for the restaurant only 3 weeks ago, on January 2nd. This restaurant, which is located inside the Grand Kartal Hotel where the disaster occurred, and the document records that it is in accordance with the regulation on the protection of buildings from fire. So, but as we hear from the guest who survived the fire, they said like the extinguishing system wasn't activated after the fire started. In addition, there were no escape routes between the floors, and the smoke alarm didn't work. So the fire spread quickly because of the wooden cladding of the interior and exterior of the hotel, and this accelerated the fire and caused the flames to grow even more.
As you mentioned there, many survivors and eyewitnesses have been speaking out about their ordeal and what they went through, and also making their way through really smoky corridors. It was completely dark. What else have we been hearing about what families have gone through?
Well, we have seen lots of footages emerging today. In one particular video in which the very first moments of ski hotel fire, In this video, you can hear the screams of people crying for help. They are saying they don't know how to leave the building, and they said that they are burning. So like we have seen some other videos emerge on social media. In these videos, like some guests on the higher floors, they tried to escape the building by tying bed sheets, and some of them jumped to their deaths because of the lack of the fire escapes. And today, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced a day of national mourning, and also like some funerals of the victims were held. And there was one particular family that everyone has been talking and reporting about because 14 members of this family were among the people who died in the deadly fire. And this same family happened to be one of the President Erdogan's old friend's family and a former AK Party member. And we've seen President Erdogan attending the funeral, and he was seen crying during this ceremony. And we also heard about the names and identity of some of the victims who lost their lives in this fire. There were very well-known names, some academics, journalists, and sports people.
As we mentioned, 9 people have been detained by police. What else are authorities telling us at the moment?
Well, as of 1 hour ago, the number of who have been detained in the connection with this deadly fire has risen to 11. And again, just minutes ago before this show, we heard that Deputy Mayor of Bolu Municipality, who signed the document that I mentioned earlier, he's among those who detained. Also today, we heard from the Justice Minister. He said that the hotel's owner was among the people detained for questioning. And Turkish government also today announced that they appointed 6 prosecutors to lead an investigation into the fire.
Sare, Selvi, Ozturk in Istanbul, thank you so much. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. 2 people, including a 2-year-old boy, have been killed and 2 others are seriously injured after a stabbing in Germany. The incident took place at a park in the town of Aschaffenburg. Police have detained a suspect and have asked witnesses to come forward. At least 19 have died in an Indonesian landslide. Hundreds of rescuers are scouring through thick mud and debris to find survivors. Intense rainfall sparked the disaster in the mountainous area in the central Java province. Bridges have collapsed and cars and houses have been buried as a result. Prince Harry has settled his privacy invasion lawsuit against the publisher of the Sun newspaper. It's after News Group newspapers issued a rare apology to the British royal for years of unlawful intrusion. He will be paid a substantial sum as part of the settlement. And South Korea's birth rate is set to rise for the first time in 9 years. It's after a rebound in marriages following a dip during the COVID-19 pandemic. The number of newborns between January and November 2024 rose 3% from a year earlier. South Korea has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world. At least 10 Palestinians have died and around 40 are injured after an Israeli airstrike in the Jenin area of the West Bank. The attacks come just days after the weekend ceasefire in Gaza. Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Sadafi has warned that the ongoing raids in the West End could destabilize the entire region. We can now go live to Tel Aviv to speak to our correspondent, Sarah Coates. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me this evening. The ceasefire may have been agreed and a number of hostages and prisoners released, but there's been no let-up in the level of violence there.
Hi there, Leigh Ann. You're certainly right. This is only intensifying, escalating on the back of that ceasefire, which, of course, did come into play in Gaza just a few days ago. And according to Israeli officials, it's part of a broader campaign against militants in the West Bank, citing an uptick of violence against Israelis in that area, but certainly on the ground, it is a very worrying situation. That's what we've heard from Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi. In addition to these 10 people that have already been killed, the dozens of others wounded, medics on the ground say that there are quite a large number of people that ambulances simply cannot get to, and this is because they say they're being blocked by the Israeli military. So this is certainly causing a lot of alarm bells. And we've also just heard over the past few hours from the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He came out to say that this is deeply concerning.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the strike in Jenin was an additional step in the Israeli objective to bolster security in the West Bank. Why is that area so important to him, and what does he want to actually achieve?
We do have a statement from the Prime Minister's office. He says that the operation will be extensive and significant to eradicate terrorism in Jenin. We also do need to remember the amount of pressure that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under, especially from the far right-wing members of his coalition who really didn't want to see this ceasefire come into play in Gaza and have been pushing Benjamin Netanyahu to keep fighting this war. So this could certainly be seen, this raid in the West Bank, as something that would potentially appease these people and also take a bit of pressure off him there. But also in that statement from his office, that was also citing Iran. It says, we're operating in a systematic and decisive way against the Iranian axis wherever it sends its arms, in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and in Judea and Samaria. But we do need to also point out that it's not just raids that we're seeing from the Israeli military. There's been a massive spike in violence over just the past few days of Israeli settlers storming a number of villages, setting fire to cars, homes, and beating people. Leigh Ann.
The UN Secretary-General has been speaking at the Davos summit today. He said Iran must make the first step towards improving relations in the region and the US over nuclear weapons. Is a permanent truce actually likely going further?
I think that looks pretty unlikely, especially when we're talking about Iran and Israel, given the fierce relationship or lack thereof that they have. And we also need to take into account what we heard from the spokesperson from Iran's Atomic Energy Agency just on Monday. He said that Tehran's nuclear program remains central to strengthening national security and deterring international threats. But I think what we can expect to see is President Donald Trump really taking a hard line on Iran to try and further isolate it here in the region and also develop further alliances between, let's say, potentially Israel and Saudi Arabia, which would expand on the Abraham Accords, further push Iran out and further bring Israel into the fold. Leigh Ann.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining me. At least 9 people have died after a record winter storm hit southern parts of the United States, bringing snow, ice and dangerous conditions to millions of people. Much of the region, which includes Texas, Louisiana and Florida, rarely sees any snowfall, prompting some unlikely scenes in places usually basking in sunshine, as Nick Harper reports.
New Orleans' French Quarter is known for its music, just not normally in such a wintry setting. It's a rare occurrence in the Louisiana city, which hasn't seen snowfall since 2009. The Sunshine State swaps scorching temperatures for wintry weather. Florida's beaches blanketed with record-setting snow. While police and firefighters in Houston, Texas, took a moment to enjoy the unexpected weather. Schools in the city and in much of the southern region remain closed, with only a few people venturing out.
Yeah, the snow is beautiful. Look at this. Yeah, so soft and it's thicker than I expected. So I think it's great.
It's actually really fun having it here because it's kind of a throwback to my childhood and college days.
But the snow dump also brought plenty of problems. Dangerous conditions on the roads and more than 2,000 flights cancelled. 33 million people from Texas through Georgia and into the Carolinas and Florida have been hit by the deadly deep freeze, with wintry weather alerts now issued in at least 7 states. In the nation's capital, snow from earlier this month is yet to melt. No bad thing for some of the city's newest residents, 2 pandas from China. The pair make their public debut this Friday. Nick Harper, Arabiya News.
Time for a look at the top business news. And Saudi Arabia's Prince Al Walid bin Tali's investment company has told Al Arabiya Business they are interested in investing in TikTok if Elon Musk or others did offer. Here's what he had to say at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
If Mr. Musk today presented an opportunity for an investment in TikTok, since his name is on the table as one of the potential buyers of TikTok, are you interested in that?
If Mr. Musk or others offered, we would have an interest in looking into this investment, no doubt.
Meanwhile, Meta, the social media giant behind Facebook and Instagram, have offered to pay US content creators up to $5,000 if they join their platforms. It says those joining from third-party social apps will get cash based on an evaluation of their social presence. Although it doesn't mention TikTok specifically, it has thought Meta is taking advantage of the uncertain future facing its biggest rival. Now, Netflix has added nearly 90 million subscribers during the holiday season to end last year with more than 300 million subscribers. Company executives credited steady investments in shows and films with helping power growth at the streaming giant, while also it's announcing it's increasing prices in Argentina, Canada, Portugal and the US. Netflix ended 2024 with a strong lineup, which of course included a second season of the global hit Squid Game. Turning our attention to sport now, and defending champion Jannik Sinner is safely through to the last 4 after a dominant win over home favourite Alex de Minaur in the Australian Open. He'll face Ben Shelton on Friday after the American saw off Lorenzo Sonego. In the women's draw, Iga Swiatek breezed through despite a double bounce controversy and will take on Madison Keys for a place in the final. Now, Lewis Hamilton has had his first experience of a Ferrari Formula One car at the team's Ferrano test track over in Italy. The 40-year-old 7-time champion tested a 2023 vehicle today as part of his acclimatization work with his new team. Teammate Charles Leclerc will drive the car in the afternoon as he begins to get back up to speed after the winter break. A reminder of our top stories today. US President Trump threatens Russia with fresh sanctions if they don't do a deal with Ukraine. Trump also weighs up a 10% import tariff on China over his concerns of fentanyl use. A Turkish ski resort fire claims the lives of 76 people, whilst 9 others are detained over safety concerns. And 9 people have died as the Deep South faces a deep freeze. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you for joining us. Coming up next is Riz Khan, and don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. The Olympic Games can trace its history back to the days of ancient Greece. But the modern Games has to deal with a very different range of issues both on and off the track, pool or piste. From wars and global warming to doping and transgender athletes, the International Olympic Committee faces a series of obstacles worthy of a steeplechase to reach the finish line of producing a successful summer or winter event. Well, for the first time in 12 years, the world's most important sporting body is about to have a new figure on top of the podium. 7 candidates have entered the race to replace Thomas Bach as the president of the International Olympic Committee. Each candidate will present their pitches to the committee next week before the final decision is made in March. Among them is the Swedish-born British billionaire businessman, environmentalist and president of the International Ski Federation, Johan Eliasch. We sat down for a fascinating conversation about his vision for the future of the Olympics, including the possible addition of new sports, transgender athletes, and why Africa and the Middle East should expect to be among the host cities under an Eliasch presidency. Johan Eliasch, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Now, you wear a lot of different hats, but let's go back to September 2024, when you were announced to be in line for presidency of the International Olympic Committee, the IOC. Why are you so keen to have that job?
So, I'm really inspired by sports' ability to unite people in peace, in harmony, working together, where everything seems to be possible, nothing impossible. And it's that inspiration that I find really fascinating, and I think also is something that is unique about sport and the Olympic movement.
You're up against a fairly competitive field of candidates, including His Royal Highness Prince Faisal Al Hussein of Jordan, Lord Sebastian Coe, who's President of World Athletics from the UK, and Juan Antonio Samaranch, whose father ran the IOC for 21 years. What do you have to say about your fellow candidates and why you would be the better pick?
So I think we have a phenomenal field of candidates. In my case, I have a long background and lots of experience in many areas which are very important to the Olympic movement. I have served in governments. I have been very active in sustainability, climate change and climate action. I have been a keen athlete. I have turned around big companies. I managed big companies. I'm used to managing change in a very fast-changing world. I understand media, broadcasting, sponsorship, sports marketing. So I have a unique set of skills. And it wasn't by design, but it just happens to be that when you bring all this together, I am in a way uniquely qualified for the job.
We'll go through all the challenges that you might face if you become president of the IOC, but there are many people who say, why do we still need the Olympics? Why are they still relevant?
And again, it has this unique ability to unify, where athletes come to the games in a peaceful environment, and where the movement is also a very strong voice for bringing awareness to many important issues, and can do a lot more than governments can, big institutions like the United Nations or the G20 has ever been able to do.
Well, the IOC has a fairly checkered history with a lot of controversies, including doping scandals, the issue of bribery allegations linked to rigging of bids to host the Olympics, and then the banning of Russia's anthem, flag, and name from international sporting events. Considering all these issues, do you really still want the job?
As I said, I think the Olympic movement is phenomenal, what it does. And yes, it has a rich history and it's had its challenges. And that's also why it's so important to have an experienced and qualified leader of the movement. Because the expectations are set very high. And if something goes wrong, the consequences can be very damaging.
What is your vision for the Olympic movement, and how would you ensure that it remains relevant in the coming decades? Let's go to the headlines first, and then we can explore in more detail.
I mean, what is very important is that we stay ahead of the curve in every sense, and that is we need to put the sport at the front. Same with the athletes. Strong focus on the athletes. We need to be very good on digital. AI is clearly something that is going to have a profound impact. It's not going to think for us, but we can make a lot of things, much more efficient and easier to attain by using AI. Technology, of course, same thing here. We need to embrace new technologies, make sure that when new technologies are invented, bring them into what we do. We need to defend our political neutrality, and that's really important, that athletes are not weaponized for political purposes, because no athlete can ever choose where he or she was born and shouldn't suffer the consequences of their political leaders. Sustainability is another very important topic, and here it is important that we are seen as responsible, that we take action, we do our bit, because climate action is not just we can't sit back and expect governments or other big organizations to do something. What we can do is we can spread awareness, because this is an existential threat that is going to be solved by each individual.
We'll get into some of those issues in just a moment, but I want to touch on the fact that the Olympic Games do bring in billions of dollars for the IOC, and yet there's growing concern about the costs associated with hosting the Olympic Games. So what reforms would you propose in order to address those challenges?
So here I believe we can do more for less, using new technologies, perhaps involving the international federations more in the event delivery. Because let's face it, we do these events day in, day out. The IOC, they do events 2 weeks every 2 years. So are there synergies there? Absolutely. We just need to figure out how we can best take advantage of them. So yes, I believe we can do more for less. And yes, I think with technology opportunities, digital opportunities, clear sponsorship architectures that are constantly developed, and choosing the right strategy for what kind of broadcaster we want to be in the future, there is great scope for generating much more revenue and reduce our cost structure.
Now, Mr. Eliasch, how would you address the growing concerns about the commercialization of the Olympic Games while trying to maintain their integrity and prestige?
Well, I mean, every sport has to be commercial in the way it approaches things, without compromising the integrity of the sport, the athletes, and of course, delivering an event that has the biggest possible reach. And it's always a fine balance between reach and the money. but you can always find the right balance. And here is where we need to think very carefully about how we can, for instance, use streaming more effectively to get a bigger footprint in terms of viewership, and how we can advance storytelling, because there are so many wonderful stories and so many stories that people are interested in between the games, so that we're not just relevant for 2 weeks every 2 years.
Well, TV advertising has long been the mainstay for the Olympic Games, but younger generations, younger audiences tend to consume content across social media rather than the mainstream media or legacy media. So how should the IOC adapt to the digital era?
Well, that's very much something that we have adapt to, because people consume content differently today. And it may not have shown up entirely in the numbers that we see from linear broadcasters or in terms of long-term sponsorship arrangements. Here, we need to be very much digging in deep, analyzing, and here, I mean, people, just to give you one trend, people, they want highlights, they want short clips, they don't necessarily use television screens, but their mobile phones to consume content. And here, new technologies such as cloud-based delivery of programming is going to be essential. The IOC, they have been doing a great job at taking this to heart, and this is something that we have to intensify and do even more about, so we always stay ahead of the curve.
Mr. Eliasch, I know that for years you've combined your passion for both sports and sustainability through rainforest conservation to combat climate change, even in your role as president of the International Ski Federation. So what steps do you think the IOC should take to make the Olympic Games more environmentally sustainable and to reduce their massive carbon footprint?
So, I mean, what we've done at FIS, we've launched an impact program where we look at ways to minimize the carbon footprint everywhere we go. And here with the IOC, I think, and by the way, they have great programs run by Prince Albert, who has really contributed in this area. And here, I believe what is really important is that wherever we go, we leave a legacy behind. And with the Winter Games, here we have new challenges due to change in the climate, which is profound. And that is, we need to go higher and higher in altitude to have snow security. So we need to take that on board. We also need to make sure that therefore the places we pick are not only used once, but can be used many times. We need a rotation scheme, and this has been invented before me, and it is something which I'm fully behind. And I have already said in my capacity as the biggest federation within the Winter Games, because we deliver more than 50% of the medals in the Winter Games and over 80% in the Paralympic Winter Games. And that is, we will support the locations to make sure that those locations invest in the event delivery. And if we do that, we can play a part as a federation. I hope if I'm elected, this is something that I will really push for. And then we'll have a rotation scheme between set number of regions, locations, where you rotate the games over a long-term cycle.
On a similar theme, FIFA moved the football calendar to allow Qatar to host a Winter World Cup, and Saudi Arabia will be hosting the tournament in 2034. So would you be prepared to move the Summer Olympics to winter in order to accommodate hot climate countries so that they can host the event?
Well, if you look at the front page of my manifesto, curiously, what you see there is a picture of the globe with Africa, the Middle East, India, and Southeast Asia. And there's a thought behind that, and that is these are places where we haven't been. We've been to South America, we've been to China, we've been to Australia, and of course Europe, North America, and so forth. But we must not forget Africa. It's a big continent with a lot of people, and this is a place we need to go to. Same with the Middle East. We've never been in the Middle East, and we haven't been to India. Now, some people may say that this would be challenging because of calendar issues, lack of infrastructure in some places, etc. But careful planning, and if we plan ahead, I am convinced that we can overcome every obstacle and deliver magnificent games. In fact, wherever we go in the world.
Well, Saudi Arabia is fast becoming known as a location for hosting top international events, from football and boxing to golf and tennis. Would you welcome a bid from Saudi Arabia to host the Olympic Games?
We should encourage each and everyone to apply, and I would say in the case of Saudi Arabia, their commitment and dedication to sport is fantastic. And I remember years ago when they started promoting the idea of actually doing snow-based events. People said that can't be true. Where do you find snow in Saudi Arabia? But they actually do have snow, and they do have mountains reaching 2,600 meters, and they have invested in building up ski resorts. So yes, everything is possible. Yeah, if Saudi Arabia applied, I think we should take that very, very seriously.
Earlier, you mentioned that the Olympic Games can be a platform for unity, peace and justice. If so, how can the IOC make judgments on who can participate at times of geopolitical conflict, such as we have with Russia, Ukraine, or Israel, Gaza?
Yeah, so here there is one very important principle, and that is athletes, they can't choose where they were born. So, and at the same time, they should never be politicized or weaponized for political purposes. That's sacrosanct for me and for, I hope, most people. And here we have to defend sports political neutrality. Of course, we are always going to tread in political waters, but we have to defend our political neutrality because otherwise it's a slippery slope, which does not end up in a good place. And here we have a special program for independent, neutral athletes, which worked very well during Paris. And if it has to be used, then of course, this should be used, but we should never be drawn into politics.
The vast majority of Olympic athletes and audiences watching at home want to be sure that they're watching a fair competition devoid of cheating and doping scandals and so on. If you become IOC president, how would you reassure them?
So I think here, I mean, we have very good anti-doping agencies in WADA, and we have very stringent testing programs to make sure that this is very much monitored and to avoid anyone cheating. Of course, another topic that has come up is with women's sport. And how, for me at least, very important that we ring fence women's sport. Now, this is a separate topic, but I bring that up because it's been talked about much. And here it is very much we have to protect women, ring fence their sport, because if not, it becomes something else, and that can never be the case.
Well, that became a major issue in Paris when the Olympics were held there, where the issue of transgender athletes became a big debate. How would you approach that particular issue?
Very much science-based, not based on trends or ideology. It has to be science-based. It's the only fair way of doing it.
There's only one woman in the lineup of 7 candidates to be IOC president. What would you do to promote greater gender equality, not just in the Olympic participation, but also in the IOC leadership roles?
I think across the board here, the IOC have done a very good job at promoting gender equality and making sure that you have balanced gender participation. This is something that I very much promoted also within the FIS. I say here that it should have been more women in this race, and hopefully in years to come, next time there will be more women candidating for the presidency.
When we look at athletes across the global spectrum, there's still a huge discrepancy in terms of the resources available to competitors, from training facilities and equipment to ideal nutrition to the latest scientific training techniques, and even access to sports medicine to deal with injuries in the best way possible. So what can the IOC do to level the playing field so that athletes from developing nations have the same kind of opportunities as those from established sporting nations?
This is why the IOC have solidarity programs to proliferate and to help and invest in countries that are developing, from the developing world. And this is really important. And there's one thing that I've always said is that within the International Ski Federation, no matter where you come from, where your federation is based, we're all equally special. And that is very important to me. So we should all have equal opportunity as far as it is possible. Equal opportunity training, equal opportunity to participation. Now, of course, we're not there yet, and that's not going to happen overnight. But we must strive to achieve that.
Now, I know, Mr. Eliasch, you're a very enthusiastic and accomplished skier, and you'll know that snowboarding was kind of looked down upon compared with traditional skiing for a long time. And there are many sports fans who have strong views about what sports should be added or could be added to the Olympic Games. In recent years, we've had BMX, skateboarding, and even breakdancing added to the Summer Games, while, of course, snowboarding has long been now a part of the Winter Olympic Games. How do you get the balance right between appealing to younger generations with these newer sports while still preserving the tradition of the competition?
Yeah, I mean, that's really important because we compete against lots of other sports. And we have to remain super attractive. Here it's we need to bring in be open-minded and bring in new sports. It's very, very important. I mean, at FIS, for instance, I brought in free ride. Why did I do that? Because it's super attractive. It has a great following, and I mean the television pictures that you get are fantastic. And that is what we need. Similarly, I mean, if we look here at new format, what I would do is promote relays with able-bodied and Paralympic athletes, because that will help. That will help it's to proliferate Paralympics, lift that up more, and create more interest. And the more interest we can have in the Paralympics, the better it is for sport as a whole. So it's small, sometimes big ideas in this direction, And of course, there are many sports out there that we should continue bringing in. But of course, we can't do everything in one go. So we need to do this gradually, step by step.
Now, I'd like to get your view on just a couple of sports that have strong support for inclusion in the Olympic Games. They require more skill than athleticism. So let's have a look at esports and darts. Now, why shouldn't dart players take their place alongside, for example, archers in the Olympic Games?
So if we start with esports, this is something which has grown immensely in popularity. There's over 260 million participants in esports, and that is very complementary for the Olympic movement, and that is why we have a strong push there. And we'll have the first esports Olympics very soon in Saudi Arabia, by the way. Now, when it comes to darts and other new sports, there is obviously a long list of sports that want to participate. Again, this has to be done step by step. It has to be evaluated, and that is an ongoing process, which, by the way, the IOC have been very good at.
Now, I'd like you to take a step back from your potential role as president of the IOC to that of just a spectator of sports, because there are many people who believe the Olympics have drifted quite far from their original spirit of just fair, free international competition, now marred very much by politicking and scandals. What chance is there to get the Olympic Games right back to their roots?
Well, it should always be based on pure competition, but how we display the sport, that is constantly evolving with social media, with different, storytelling, which is very important, particularly to remain relevant in between the games. Youth Olympic Games, qualifying series, etc. So the competitive spirit, that principle, that will always be there. I can't see how that would ever change. Now, for us to remain competitive with other sports, it's equally very important that we stay ahead of the curve, and this is where the whole, shall we say, sports environment has to be closely observed, and we have to keep up with the latest trends and invest in the latest technology, and that's the foundation for what we do.
Well, we wish you well for your IOC candidacy. I wonder, will you have time to devote to all the other things you do, especially sustainability projects like Cool Earth, the organization you co-founded for rainforest conservation? Will you be able to cram all this in, since you have so much on your plate all the time?
I think today there are many very good people involved in these activities, so I'm sure they will continue that work with or without me. So, but the one thing I am really committed to, and that is proliferating our voice in climate action, to spread awareness and getting things done, because here we can do a lot.
Well, Johan Eliasch, it was a real pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Johan Eliasch there on his bid to become president of the International Olympic Committee. Well, we talked about some potential new sports for the Games, with BMX, skateboarding and snowboarding winning their place at the Olympic schedule in recent years, and breakdancing making its debut at last year's Paris Olympics. But did you know that as different events come and go, some of those which have fallen out of favour included tug of war, hot air ballooning, live pigeon shooting and painting. That admittedly was a bit like watching paint dry. And at the first modern Olympics, At the English village of Much Wenlock in 1867, the most popular event was called Tilting at the Ring, in which riders on horseback used a lance to unhook a small metal ring from a wooden crossbar. I wonder if it's time for that one to return. Well, we know who to ask if he gets the job. I'm Riz Khan from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, of course, to the Saudi House. Today, we're going to be talking about climate change, Saudi Arabia in particular, their contributions to addressing global environmental challenges. His Excellency Adel Al-Jubeir is here with me. Your Excellency, it's wonderful to see you as always.
It was a pleasure.
I want to kick off, though, by asking you about what we've seen in just the last 48 hours. U.S. President Donald Trump signing a raft of executive agreements and pledging to withdraw from the Paris Accords. In your mind, does that damage the world's ability to fight climate change?
I don't believe so. I think there are different ways of achieving the objective that we all want, and countries can pursue whatever path they believe is best for them. I think the important thing is the bottom line. The Trump administration in the first term actually did a lot to reduce carbon in the United States. So this is a very positive development. I think the important thing is that we look at these discussions as cooperative discussions, not as negotiations, because we're all trying to find the most optimum path forward to dealing with the challenges in a way that's unemotional, that's logical, that's scientific, so that we can overcome this challenge that we have. We're all in this together. There are no winners or losers. We all win or we all lose. That's the attitude that we in Saudi Arabia bring to this discussion.
Just 2 years ago here at the World Economic Forum, Al Gore described what was happening in climate as boiling oceans and rain bombs. A lot of people pushed back on that at the time privately, but they didn't necessarily feel comfortable doing so on a public stage. In your mind, how are these words changing when we describe climate?
We have a challenge that is before us with regard to climate change and with global warming, and nobody can dispute that, and the impact that it has on not only our climate, but on our politics, on conflicts, on not in dispute. I think what we need to adopt is a rational, scientifically based conversation, not grandstanding and not threatening, because it will be like the shepherds who cried wolf too many times and then nobody believed them. We know we have a problem. We know we have a challenge. So now that we know this, let's not talk about how it's going to kill all of us. Let's talk about how we extricate ourselves from this problem. We can do it by education. We can do it by more rational policies. We can do it by more efficient production of energy. We can do it by more efficient use of energy. We can do it by investing in alternative sources of energy. We can use it by combating desertification, by land restoration. We can use it by funding research to experiment with transformative technologies. And we are in Saudi Arabia doing all of this. We are setting aside 30% of our territory, land as well as sea, to be protected areas so that they're untouched. We are investing in greening. We are investing in transforming waste into energy. We are investing in solar, in hydro, we're looking seriously at nuclear power. We're investing in capturing carbon from the atmosphere. We're investing in a blue economy. We're investing in our seas and sustainable fishing. We are doing all of it Because of two reasons. One, we live on this planet. We breathe the same air everybody does, and it's important for us that it's a healthy planet. And two, it's also very profitable. So there's an economic incentive to do this. And we have taken our experience and we expanded it into initiatives like the Middle East Green Initiative, which includes more than 22 countries, to teach countries how to incorporate the circular carbon economy approach so they can deal with environment and climate change issues the way we have been, so that we all benefit in our region. Because, as I said, we all win or we all lose. We are all in this together, and climate and pollution doesn't differentiate between one country and another. That's why the effort has to be regional and it has to be global.
Would you say then perhaps that the election of Donald Trump and his presidency is the great reset that the climate conversation needed?
I hope it would be, because I think everybody is concerned about environment and everybody is concerned about climate, and it's important that all of us, individuals and nations and companies, do everything we can to deal with this challenge. But we will deal with this challenge. We have the technology, we have the financial resources. We need the political will to engage in a positive, cooperative conversation where we all come up with the best way forward, rather than engage in an emotional, argumentative, political scoring, hypocritical conflict that serves nobody.
Speaking of hypocrisy, over the last several days in the Financial Times, there's been reporting that billions of dollars have fled out of green ETFs and green investing. In your mind, are they jumping the gun there?
I don't know why they pulled out and what investment criteria they have. I do know that in Saudi Arabia, the investments that we have made in renewable energy, in solar, in turning waste into energy, in when we're looking at nuclear, when we're looking at efficiencies, ensuring that we don't have flaring of oil and gas, that we don't have leakages, that those have been extremely profitable. We have huge investments in electric vehicles. We're looking at producing electric batteries. We're looking at storage facilities. And for us, it's been these have been very profitable investments. So we are committed to continuing to invest in this. But in terms of the withdrawal of funds, I don't know what was the reason for them investing in those funds in the first place. I don't know what the returns are, so I'm not in a position to comment on it. But what I can say is it could be a function of people getting excited, wanting to do politically the right thing, and then realizing maybe the funds should have gone somewhere else.
When you think about what Saudi Arabia is doing in this fight against climate change and to make the planet, frankly, a better place, it was interesting, His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz just a few days ago during the Future Minerals Forum in Saudi Arabia talked about exporting enriched uranium, yellow cake. That's politically dicey, if you will, as you know. In your mind, how do you explain those kinds of exports to the world?
Very simple. We are a large energy producer in the world. We want to be an exporter of energy to the world, whether that energy is oil or gas, whether that energy is solar, whether that energy is electricity, whether that energy is hydro, whether that energy is nuclear. We want to have a nuclear program in Saudi Arabia to produce energy. We have between 1% and 4%, according to estimates, of the world's uranium deposits in country. It makes a lot of sense to exploit those resources economically by mining it. It makes even more sense that once you mine it, that you engage in the processing to turn the uranium into fuel that you can sell at a higher price. So that includes all of the steps in turning uranium from dirt into energy. And it involves taking advantage of the associated industries that come with this. and taking advantage of the profits that come with this. We do not want to be a country where mining companies come in, dig up the soil, remove it, do all the processing and all the refining and all the producing of energy outside. We end up with a hole, and we take less than 10% of the value chain. We want to benefit jobs, associated industry, and profits. And we believe that we can do it, as does the International Atomic Energy Agency, in a way that has nothing to do with producing nuclear weapons. Our objective is energy and profit.
Tell me this, speaking of weapons, in the years past, we've often talked about how Saudi Arabia in the 70s and Russia just a few years ago was using energy as a weapon. In your mind, how vulnerable are we today in our energy systems? And I'm talking about whether it be the enormous amount of energy that AI, as we know, is going to require, whether it be just oil markets generally. How vulnerable are we today in our energy markets?
I don't believe, I wouldn't describe it as vulnerable. I would describe it as we are looking at an increase in demand that needs to be filled somehow. Because if it's not filled, then you're going to see a huge spike in prices. And AI and data centers require a lot of energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere. We in Saudi Arabia want to be a hub for these centers. We have the land. We want to be able to, we can produce that energy using renewable energy, solar energy, other energy, and we can do it efficiently. And we believe that given our geographic location, we can have the connectivity to be able to send it abroad. So this is one of the priorities for us. So I think that this is how I would look at it. In terms of oil weaponizing energy, we have maintained for many decades that oil is not a weapon. It's not
anymore.
It's not a weapon. You can't shoot it. You can't fire it. You don't take it to the battlefield. It's a commodity, and it's a precious commodity. It relies on supply and demand, sets the price. We want to be a responsible producer. We have been a swing producer where we try to keep the markets in balance as much as we can to reduce the massive fluctuations in the price of oil, so that it makes it easier for people to invest, to borrow money, and to return their investment, and also to plan long term. That provides stability for the global financial markets, which serves us because we are big investors and we are energy producers, and we want stability in the financial markets.
Yeah. Donald Trump is widely expected to visit Saudi Arabia in the near future. What kind of conversation do you want to have with him regarding energy and climate?
President Trump is most welcome in Saudi Arabia anytime he wants to come. And I think the conversations between Saudi Arabia and the United States, we have been allies, we have been partners for 80 years. We have huge interests, whether it's bilaterally in terms of trade, investment, in terms of cultural exchanges, in terms of students, in terms of whether it's regionally. We work very closely together on bringing peace and stability in a region, maintaining security in a region, whether it's globally, the same issue. We have very important relationships on technology, on energy, on investments. We are large investors in the U.S. economy. American companies are large investors in the Saudi economy. So it is a huge relationship, and it has many, many dimensions to it. And every time our two countries have worked closely together, they have been able to achieve great things, whether in terms of stability and security and peace regionally and globally, and in terms of prosperity for both countries when it comes to trade and investment issues.
There's a lot of speculation about what the U.S.-China relationship will be in the future. Saudi Arabia, of course, has a strong relationship both with the United States and, of course, with Beijing. How worried are you about the possibility that a trade war between the United States and China could derail your agenda as a country?
We have very strong relationships with both countries. Our relationship with the U.S. is a strategic relationship. China is our largest trading partner. We believe that stability in the global financial system and the global market serves everyone, and we hope that the two countries will be able to negotiate their differences, because a trade war does not serve the interests of either. And I believe that we have seen in the past that the two countries have been able to negotiate or resolve their issues and reach understandings through by discussing it rather than by turning it into trade wars.
Talk to me a little bit about the region when it comes to climate. Obviously, we see the UAE made a great deal of strides, obviously hosting COP28. In your mind, as Saudi looks forward to its own hosting of a COP, what are some of the things you're hoping that the region is able to achieve?
Our region, the Gulf region in particular, has done, I think, an outstanding job in terms of dealing with climate, the challenges of climate, as well as land degradation, as well as biodiversity. So the Rio Trio, the three COPs, we have invested tremendous resources in it, beginning with education and all the way to implementation. In Saudi Arabia, we have more than 70 initiatives domestically that deal with all of these issues. We have initiatives globally. I mentioned the Middle East Green Initiative. We established the Global Water Organization. That was an initiative by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince to bring clean water and how we use water more efficiently to as many people as possible. We are part of the Methane Pledge. We are involved with cleaning oceans, and we're involved with reversing pollution of plastics. We are involved in a lot of initiatives, and we have provided investments to many countries around the world to help them with resilience, to help them with beefing up infrastructure, to help them with desalination, to help them with on and on and on. We are doing a lot of things. We hosted COP16, the Earth COP, was a land degradation and drought COP, and our objective was to raise the awareness level and highlight the link, the nexus between land degradation and security. If you have land degradation, people don't have food. They move to places where they can plant food. Chances are people live there. You have conflict, you have bloodshed, you have violence, you have extremism, you have terrorism, you have migration. The migrants end up in a country where there could be a reaction that leads to extremist politics. So when you look at extremist politics in Europe, you can trace its linkage to a particular place in Africa or in the Middle East. And you can trace the origins of that conflict to drought. You look at the countries in the Sahel, 90% of the Chad River evaporated since the 1960s. It created dislocations for millions of people who moved, created conflict, and then we're paying the price. Darfur, Sudan, has been engaged in a conflict for almost 40 years. And it started with drought, and it turned into a conflict, ethnic conflict, civil war, people paying the price. And our objective is to highlight this to people, invest early in land restoration, and avoid the consequences that will cost us 50 times more to deal with than if we had dealt with it at the outset. And the irony of all of this is investing $1 in land restoration generates between $7 and $30 in profit. This is better than investing in high tech. Why don't people do it? And this is what we're trying to show people. And this is not an issue, land degradation, that concerns North Africa and the Middle East. Germany has a problem with the waters of the Rhine. Southern Europe has problems with drought. This is an issue that impacts everyone. Sweden gets dust from the Sahara Desert, as does Costa Rica. We get dust from as far away as the Chinese desert. Now, we have a lot around us. So this is a global issue, and it's straightforward to deal with. We just need to focus on it and get it done, and this is what we're trying to do in Saudi Arabia.
you may remember President Biden's Secretary of Defense, as well as the current Secretary of Defense in the United Kingdom, have cited climate change as their number one worry for the planet, their number one concern. Now that we have Trump in the White House, is climate your number one concern for the planet?
Ours?
Yeah.
I believe for everybody, the issue of climate change, the issue of whether it's too little water or too much water, the issue of rising temperatures, everybody acknowledges this.
But is it the number one concern facing us?
I think it certainly is. If it's not the number one, it is right up there, because it impacts everything. It impacts, for example, desertification, impacts the reflection of the sun, impacts weather patterns over the Atlantic, impacts the frequency and intensity of hurricanes in the Caribbean, impacts weather climates around the world. Dust can do the same thing. And also the climate issues can impact what happens in the oceans, and the oceans are our biggest reservoir for carbon. And that impacts, again, the rain patterns. And so it's a cycle that impacts everything we do, and it's linked to economic development, it's linked to wars and conflict, it's linked to prosperity. 800 million people on the planet are undernourished. The amount of land we can grow food on shrinks. Populations are rising. So we're heading towards conflict. We have to fix these issues. And I don't believe that anyone disagrees with this. I believe the differences have to do with what's the right way to move forward in tackling these issues. And I think that grandstanding and emotions and hypocrisy and threats and shaming and naming and finger pointing doesn't get us anywhere. Rolling up our sleeves and planting trees, redesigning our cities, investing in technology, investing in alternative sources of energy, pointing out the benefits and the profitability of that path is what will get people to move towards the right direction. And when we can deal with these issues, they will have a direct positive impact on security, which will then have an impact on stability and peace.
It's interesting, over the last several days leading up to his inauguration, Donald Trump talking about Greenland. I've spent a lot of time in Russia and Ukraine, as you know. And when we talk about climate and what's happening in the Arctic, the ice, surprise, surprise, is melting. That raises security concerns. Russia has the most military intelligence hardware in the Arctic, as well as oil and gas infrastructure, as you know. In your mind, are we living in dangerous times as a result of climate change?
I think we are always living in challenging times. The history, unfortunately, of mankind has been one of wars, not peace and stability. I believe that the conflicts may shift from one region or another depending on the century we live in, but war has been a constant in our history, unfortunately. I think we are moving towards a global society, a global village. I don't want to call it village, it's too big for a village, where we now recognize that something happening on one end of the world has a direct impact on something on the other end of the world, which we never had before. How long did it take to get mail from Europe to the United States 150 years ago? Now it takes a nanosecond to get pictures and voicemail and from the Amazon forest to Siberia because of technology. How long? So now we deal with the issues of that go beyond our borders, that impact all of us positively or negatively. COVID doesn't differentiate between male, female, between Muslim, Jew, Christian, between Asian, African, European. It doesn't differentiate. We are all its target. And unless we all work together to contain it, we can't. And we did work together in spite of our differences. maybe not ideal, but in a very effective way to contain it and push back against it. So we are, in one hand, yes, business as usual, challenging world, you called it dangerous world, but also business as unusual, which is a recognition that we need to deal with each other to handle global issues like pandemics, like climate, like transportation, and that those issues can only be handled if we work together. So on one hand, you're seeing the world coming together much more closely than before, while at the same time we're the same in the sense of our tensions. And my hope, and I believe this is where we're heading, because I'm an optimist, is that as we learn and more, as we learn of the benefits that we get by working together, the side of the side of the equation that it spells cooperation grows, and the side of the equation that spells conflict gets diminished. Because where does conflict get us? Nowhere. We can have conflict for 30 years and we'll be worse off than we were when we started. Whereas if we have cooperation, technology, artificial intelligence, trade, in 30 years we can be many, many times wealthier than where we are today. Which vision do you want? Going forwards and upwards, or going backwards and downwards?
Are we, as he says, safer, the world, with Donald Trump in the White House?
I don't see why people talk about this. I think, yes, the world is safer. The world is safer with anyone in the White House. The world is safer because the world is beginning to recognize that we need to work together. We need to deal with challenges that are beyond us as nations or as ethnic groups or as religious groups, and that we have to deal with problems or challenges or dangers as humanity, that we can't escape that. And I believe that we are beginning to do this, and we will continue to do more of this. And so I'm hopeful that our children and grandchildren will be living in a world that is more together and more calm and more prosperous and more healthy than the one we live in.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, as federal employees and diversity officers are placed on paid leave, President Donald Trump escalates his campaign against diversity programmes in the United States. President Trump renews his threat of tariffs on imports from China, Mexico, Canada and the European Union, which could take effect as soon as the 1st of February. And with President Trump back in the office, the presidents of China and Russia hold a video call in which they pledged to take bilateral ties to greater heights. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin in Washington with the latest on the US President Donald Trump and his first 2 full days in office, Well, as soon as he returned to the Oval Office, the president issued a series of executive orders covering a whole host of issues, from immigration to trade to climate policies. Well, the new administration has also made it clear that it intends to scrap certain diversity, equity and inclusion policies. And with that in mind, the White House press secretary today confirmed that the US government workers in diversity offices are being placed on paid leave with immediate effect. Well, the press secretary said that President Trump wanted a merit-based society where people are hired based on their skills. Meanwhile, the president has been given a rare public dressing down by the Episcopal Bishop of Washington. This happened during an inaugural church service. Well, Reverend Marianne Edgar Budd told President Trump that he was sowing fear in certain communities.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now.
Well, President Trump looked irritated by those comments and has hit back at the bishop. On his Truth Social platform, the president called her tone nasty and said that the church service had been boring and uninspiring. He went on to say that the bishop and her church owe the public an apology. Here's what he said as he left the church.
Did you like it? Did you find it exciting? Not too exciting, was it? I didn't think it was a good service, no. Thank you very much.
Well, one person who can give us a few insights as to how the next 4 years could unfold is Sarah Palin, the former governor of Alaska and the 2008 Republican vice presidential nominee. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on Al Arabiya. I'd just like to start by asking you, Sarah, for your take on these first announcements and first decisions that we've been hearing from the second Trump presidency.
Well, yesterday, just an unprecedented series of actions by President Trump. He had promised these executive orders to undo the fundamental transformation of America that Obama and Biden had promised to do and had underway. President Trump believes in a fundamental restoration of America, all is good and free and prosperous and safe about our country. So what he did was yesterday already fulfilling promises that he had made. A lot of it, to me anyway, it was expected because he said he would do what he did with these executive orders. Unprecedented, very exciting. I think there's a lot of optimism, collective positivity in the air in America right now, knowing that, we're back.
And what did you make of the speech on Monday, Donald Trump's inaugural speech? I mean, as you say, it's a time, not everyone voted for Donald Trump by any means. But do you think that speech would have had the effect of unifying the nation?
I believe so, Tom. I do, because on Monday, I couldn't even keep up with the speech here. I was watching it at home, and it was one thing after another, that he was hitting on these points that, again, he had promised to do. You know what's rare about politicians in America, perhaps all over the world, is they don't govern as they've campaigned. So this is kind of a newfangled thing on a national level. I think on a local level in politics, we're held accountable if you're a mayor, if you're a governor, positions that I've held, and you do have to govern as you campaigned. On a national level, you don't normally see that. But on Monday, there was such evidence of President Trump understanding that our expectation is, yes, you will govern as you campaign. That's why we put you there. America needed a revolution, again, so that we won't be fundamentally transformed into something that we don't even recognize in terms of country without borders and without safety and prosperity. So what Trump talked about on Monday, he had promised to do, and there is a restoration. This revolution that was needed, okay, we elected a revolutionary. He's going to do what he promised to do.
Was there anything he said or anything about the tone that you thought, oh, I'm not comfortable with that, or anything about it that you didn't like?
No, there was nothing about it that I did. Again, it was a lot of not unexpected points that he made. And Tom, again, that's really refreshing on a national level to hear a politician, and Trump is kind of the antithesis of a politician. You know, he's a businessman, and that's what we need in this country right now, too, is run this country understanding budgets, understanding how important it is to be held accountable when it comes to efficiency and effectiveness with our governing policies. And on Monday, Trump really made manifest a lot of his beliefs in how this country should be governed.
Yeah, I mean, just watching and listening to that inaugural speech on Capitol Hill on Monday, I mean, it must have been pretty unpleasant for the outgoing president to listen to. I mean, we heard President Trump really lambasting President Biden and his legacy and his administration. I mean, do you think part of MAGA, making America great again, is also to respect the Constitution, to respect things like a smooth transition, and also to respect this tradition that you have in America of a strong two-party system?
Well, you know, thankfully, President Biden seems to be oblivious to criticisms, constructive criticism, things that are said around him and about him. And that's kind of a blessing that he seems to be numb, kind of callous to the idea of people holding him accountable. And that's what President Trump was doing on Monday. Now, those who have been holding the puppet strings and actually calling the shots, because we don't believe it's been Joe Biden who's been making many decisions at all the last 4 years, but those who are holding those puppet strings and pulling them and telling him what to say, yeah, no doubt, they probably took umbrage to some of the things that President Trump was pointing out, but it's all in the name of holding people accountable. This is serious stuff. This is life and death stuff. Politics in America, national politics affects our daily lives. If we want a safe and secure and prosperous and sovereign nation, and that includes safe, secure borders, we needed to elect somebody who is very, very serious about fixing the problems that the last 4 years has created for us. So President Trump was just holding not just Biden, but people around him, holding them accountable. And that's what we expected.
What about these plans we hear from President Trump to expand the territorial footprint of the United States, including perhaps the Panama Canal, Greenland, even making Canada the 51st state of the United States of America? Do you support plans like that?
Oh, I support the discussion about all this. And, only Donald Trump, the only guy in the world, it seems like, could throw something out there and really spur a lot of constructive discussion about, how has America expanded in the past? People had to throw the idea out there and then explore the possibilities. And that's what President Trump is doing now. As for Canada, oh my gosh, I love Canada. They're my next door neighbor here in Alaska. Of course, we're in between Canada and Russia. And Canadians, they seem so much like Alaskans, hardcore, unpretentious, just really hardworking people. They have terrible governance under Trudeau right now. So I think a lot of Canadians who are of that ilk that really reflects a lot of America's values, they probably wouldn't mind seeing a change in territory. But no, I think President Trump is throwing that out there for discussion, educational purposes. I don't know if he's serious about actually annexing in other areas.
Okay, so perhaps he is just starting a conversation and he's not serious about territorial expansionism. What about the Gulf of Mexico? Should that change its name to the Gulf of America in your view as well?
Yeah, who would have thought of that? But that makes perfect sense. Yeah. And I saw a map this morning, Tom, looking online that already said Gulf of America. And it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And more power to Trump for even proposing such things, or those around him who are feeding him some of these ideas. I think it's brilliant. It shows America's our standing in the world again, in that, we want to be a beacon. We want to be a bright light. We want to be a nation that is so well run that other nations could look to emulate the good things about America, and that will make the world a better place, a safer place, a more prosperous place. So even, symbolically, these changes in names of things that President Trump is proposing, I think it's a source of empowerment of the American people, and I'm all for it.
We've heard President Trump talking about ending government diversity programs. He says there are only 2 genders. What's your reaction to that kind of discourse?
Well, I think President Trump is following the science, and there are only 2 genders. That's the way God created man and woman. And this DEI, this diversity, this kind of an entitlement mentality that has so bled into a lot of policies that have been running America and running our individual states and communities, it's just gotten in the way of efficiencies and efficacy and just good common sense policy. So Trump wants to undo a lot of that President Biden had ushered in, just so that gets taken off the table and we focus on accountability, efficiencies, those things that the people of America expect in governance.
Yeah, some saying all of this spells something of a blow to what people call woke culture. What do you say to that?
Yeah, it sure does. Thank the Lord it does. The woke culture is so out of control, as is the cancel culture. But again, just this loud minority of people who believe that, common sense should be an endangered species and get out of our policies and allow this wokeism, allow this things that just absolutely do not make sense. It's not common sense to take precedence over things that need to be done in order to run a nation to be more prosperous, more secure. Yeah, that wokeism just got way out of control. And I guarantee, Tom, it's the vast, vast majority of Americans who agree with me on this, that, just put that aside, put all that wokeism, turn down the volume on that, and let's just get to the business at hand that must be done. Let's secure these borders. Let's rein in our overspending, overreaching federal government budget that is bankrupting this country. We just got to get some things done, and wokeism, it got in the way.
Let's talk about President Trump's decision to pardon or commute the sentences of people involved in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. We've heard from the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calling this decision, quote, an outrageous insult to our justice system and the heroes who suffered physical scars and emotional trauma as they protected the Capitol, the Congress, and the Constitution. How do you feel about Pelosi's criticism and President Trump's decision here?
Oh, Nancy Pelosi, she's so dramatic. She's got to be so. She's partly to blame for the January 6th escapades that you saw. She had opportunity to call in the National Guard and to allow more security at the Capitol, and she refused to do so. And then, of course, wants to point the finger at Trump in particular as to blame for January 6th. No, as President Trump has said, those people in there, many unconstitutionally held without trial, without charges even against them. They've been in jail long enough. And yeah, there are murderers in this country who have had a lot less shorter prison time than these J6ers, is what we call them. And they've been political hostages in jail with no trials. Justice delayed is justice denied. They had been denied justice. And now finally with the pardons, we do see some justice. The pardons, though, that President Trump had undergone on just yesterday, nothing compared to Biden's 8,000 and some pardons, including his entire family, kind of backtracking on forgiving what it is that they've done. They've been a crime family. They've been conflicts of interest left and right. And that's how the Biden family for years and years has empowered themselves and gotten so wealthy. It's been a lot of corruption. And here, President Biden, he just gave this blanket pardon to his family members who were engaged in this. So no, the pardons that President Trump has engaged in, nothing compared to the 8,000 and some that Biden has. That's record setting.
Let's talk about something close to home for you in Alaska. I'd like to talk about the highest mountain in North America, known to some as Mount McKinley, known to others as Denali. Does it need to have its name changed? And if so, why?
It didn't need to have its name changed to start with. It's always been Mount McKinley and McKinley Park. And, I see it. I see that highest peak in the North American continent as I drive down the road to get to the store, to get to the schools. It's absolutely beautiful. We locals up here, and as former governor, we've always called it Mount McKinley. So when it was changed to Denali, for no reason, nobody was begging for a change in naming that peak. Well, it makes sense. Just put it back the way it was, more common sense. And again, there are so many other things that need to be focused on. So changing the name back to what it was from the beginning makes sense.
This might be a little bit more relevant to you than it is to other people in Alaska, because I understand the Secret Service used to refer to you as Denali. That was your code name, apparently. Tell me if I'm wrong. But if I am wrong, but anyway, tell us if you think people are going to be upset about this decision to change the name of the mountain.
I forgot about that. And that was my code name. I'm glad you reminded me of that, Tom. That harkens back to some good memories. Yeah, I was Denali. I have one niece named Denali, another niece named McKinley. And so up here, both names are very, very beautiful to us. And no, I don't think it's going to be controversial up here. It's just like, okay, get it done. Just get back to the way it was. It wasn't broke. Who tried to fix it by changing the name of a mountain? My goodness, I don't think anybody was even asking for it.
Drill, baby, drill. That's something we heard from Donald Trump the last couple of days. We also heard that from you back in 2008, since we're casting our minds back 16 years here in this conversation. You must feel quite flattered that President Trump is using exactly the same language you were using 16 years ago, Sarah.
I'm not really flattered because I don't think anybody really remembers that I coined it. But yeah, drill, baby, drill. We need to. America has, oh man, God just dumped so many natural resources for responsible use of mankind right underfoot. We just need to drill it. We need to responsibly turn on the spigot and allow the people to benefit from responsible use of our natural resources. We do that by drilling, by producing, and by mining. It's ridiculous that America has to rely on China and foreign countries for minerals that we need to make our pharmaceuticals, to make so many products that touch our daily lives. When, again, we have the rare earths, we have the minerals. I like to say mine, baby, mine nowadays, because, that's as important as drill, baby, drill.
You took part in the Take Our Border Back rally on the southern border sometime last year, I believe it was. So I'm assuming you agree with President Trump that there is indeed an emergency on the southern border. Is that the case?
I do. There is an emergency. Look at the millions and millions of people who've come in to our country because of these porous borders. The very first act of these individuals was to break the law. If we are to be a civilization, a culture here in America that is one based on law and order, okay, you get punished then if you break the law as your first act. And it's not even punishment. It's just accountability. You got to go back. You got to get back in line, and you have to allow this immigration process to work legally and safely. We do not know who all these people are who've been allowed to, in fact, incentivize to come across our border. We're paying for people to come across our borders illegally. Makes no sense. And I know that President Trump had it seems like his top priority to make sure our borders are safe. And he wants the personnel in place. He wants the infrastructure in place to make sure that a country like America is a country based on borders. If we don't have borders, we don't have a country. It makes no sense the way that it was running, and it was a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, he wants the military involved, doesn't he? Do you think the military should be involved in the mass deportations that President Trump's spoken about?
Well, when it comes to personnel, we kind of have no choice. That's where the numbers are in terms of personnel who are equipped and able to fulfill President Trump's promise in his campaign and now through executive order. If it takes military personnel, that's fine. I know it sounds scary to some people to hear, military involvement, but These are well-trained, equipped, law-abiding individuals who collectively will obey their commander-in-chief, as it should be, and the commander-in-chief wants our country safe, wants safe borders, secure borders, and wants to know who these people are coming into our country. They've been unvetted, Tom, through the COVID crisis. Remember all that. We had unvaccinated, I'm unvaccinated too, but unvaccinated, unvetted, some very ill people even coming on over, and we let them come on over illegally, and yet the residents, the citizens of America, were held to such account, having to abide by all these bureaucratic COVID rules that illegal aliens were not ever held account to.
Okay, I mean, the military could be involved in that. They could also be involved in helping to take back control of the Panama Canal. Is that something you'd want to see?
Yeah, and there again, President Trump is right in that there can be more efficiencies there in the Panama Canal, how it's run. America needs to get to that point of everything being efficient, everything being effective. Our budget is out of control because there is so much inefficiency in the way things are transported in and out, our imports and our exports. A lot of that has to do with the Panama Canal. President Trump wants that addressed.
Now, I'd like to ask you, I mean, it's being reported that you have hinted at wanting to be Donald Trump's vice president back in 2024. I mean, maybe that's just media speculation. But regardless, when you watch J.D. Vance swear the oath of office on Monday, did you feel a sort of a slight pang of envy and think to yourself, in a parallel universe, that could have been me?
Yeah, for about 2 seconds. And then I realized, no, there's a time and a season for everything. And J.D. Vance is going to be just fine there as President Trump's right-hand man, symbolically, if nothing else. No, that's good. But no, in my life, I've handed my life over to God. I'm a Christian, and I know that my life is not my home. If God can use me in whatever capacity, I hope he will. And that, my experience, my education, my administrative experience, especially, I don't want it to go to waste. I do want to serve, but in that specific role, I had my chance, and well, Senator McCain and I, we got second out of 2, so had our chance.
Do you think Donald Trump might use you? Are you expecting a phone call, perhaps, in the days ahead? Could that be a possibility?
That's a great question, and I hope it happens. Because again, President Trump knows where I am. We have a good relationship. He knows that my administrative experience on a local level and a state level, and being chair of resources on a federal level to help with energy independence. He knows my area of expertise, and we need to tap into everyone who has an ability and a willingness to serve this country. I'm certainly willing and I'm able. I hope he calls me.
Yeah, because I mean, you've got a lot of interesting attributes on your CV. I mean, not least the fact you're a former beauty queen. You were Alaska's first female governor. You ran for vice president. You still attract a pretty strong crowd, I'm told. And I'm just wondering, why you don't have a role in the Trump presidency. Because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you've got conservative Republican views that are probably pretty much aligned with those of Donald Trump. I mean, to the letter by the sounds of things.
And Tom, nobody's really asked me this before, so it's interesting that, I appreciate that you have the guts to ask me, because, I know that there's that question out there as to why I'm not tapped into yet. President Trump has around him some gatekeepers that have made it very difficult to ingratiate oneself into the idea of the agenda that must be ushered in for America. Tom, I'll tell you something that I haven't told too many people, and that's I couldn't even get credentials to get into the GOP convention this last year. Haven't been invited to things, and again, that's okay, because you kind of get used to that. I'm not going to say rejection, but you kind of get used to that redirection that is protection. I believe in God's timing. So, that redirection, it's protection. And I know that there will come a time where I believe I will be tapped into, if you will, and I'll be able to help. But the gatekeepers around President Trump, and there's only a couple of them who they didn't like the Tea Party idea, and I helped with that Tea Party all those years ago. They haven't liked the common sense constitutional conservatism agenda that I represent. And, you know, I just hope that they won't steer President Trump in any kind of wrong direction, because it's not about me. It's about this country. It's about this world that needs America to be strong and prosperous, safe. And yeah, since it's not about me, you know, I don't take it personal. But again, you know, I hope gifts, talents, seasons, I hope everything comes into alignment and that I'm asked to serve.
I just want to press you on the issue of gatekeepers. I'm wondering, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm wondering if you're talking about Elon Musk. It is reported in some media circles that you have disagreed with him on one or two issues. I don't know if that's true. Do tell us what the case is, and what do you actually think of him?
No, I don't believe that it's Elon Musk who would personally try to keep me out of the gate. I think it's some bureaucrats around President Trump who, again, they you know, they didn't like me 20 years ago or 15 years ago or 10 years ago. So they don't like me now, and they're close to him, but not Elon Musk. And certainly I have disagreed with him on some policies, and even, you know, some of the language that he's chosen to make his points. But I appreciate specifically what he has done with purchasing Twitter so that we take steps even closer to true freedom of expression, freedom of speech. You know, we need our Bill of Rights, our constitutional rights, absolutely engaged in and protected. And with Elon Musk making such a huge investment in a forum, a format like Twitter, it has allowed that freedom of speech to be made manifest. We need that in the country. So I respect and appreciate what he's done there.
Okay, and just, you know, coming to the end now, I just want to ask you, I mean, Donald Trump has hailed the dawning of the golden age of the United States of America. Is that how it looks to you?
It does. Oh, I was just so excited yesterday, Tom. I was just excited for our country, for our world. Excited that, again, we will have someone in office who will govern as he campaigned, and the things that he campaigned on, common sense, constitutional conservatism. That's why President Trump was elected really in a landslide. He does have a mandate to do what he said he was going to do. And, you know, I'm excited for that. And I like that term, too, the golden age of America. Yeah, may this just be next 4 years, years of jubilee, years of this golden age that Americans deserve, and the rest of the country deserves to see, again, as I said earlier, to see as a beacon of hope, a beacon of light, wishing to emulate, hopefully, the good things about America, our freedom.
Yeah, I mean, there was a real party atmosphere in Washington on Monday night. We've seen, not for the first time, President Trump doing a bit of dancing. I've got to ask you your opinion on that. What do you think of his dancing skills, Sarah?
I love it. I love it that he feels free enough to just let loose. You know, I think that kind of endears him to a lot of Americans. Like, man, he's happy. Look at the hell the guy has gone through and his family has gone through. And finally, they get to stand up there, validated, vindicated. They know now that America has their back, and we're rooting for him to do the right thing. And this isn't about Donald Trump as an individual so much as it about what it is that he represents, this MAGA, this Make America Great Again. It's an agenda. It's a Trump train, a Trump movement that has his name on it, but it is collectively just a lot of Americans with a lot of common sense. We want government off our back, get it back on our side, smaller, smarter government, so that we can embrace and enjoy the freedoms that God gave us. Not man, not government, not Donald Trump even. He's in place now to protect our freedoms, but it's what he represents that we're so happy about. So yeah, when he dances, gosh, we join in, even if we're thousands of miles away, as I have been, while they've been celebrating there in D.C. You know, we kind of join in, at least emotionally, mentally we do.
Okay, well, if you do take up a position in the Trump administration, can we make a deal here and now that you will speak to Al Arabiya News again and tell us all about it?
You know, I'll speak to you first, Tom, because you ask really, really good questions. And again, I get interviewed all the time, and you ask questions that nobody else has asked. So appreciate you guys very much. Of course I will.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. It's very flattering and great to have you with us. Thank you so much, Sarah Palin.
Thank you.
Now, as world leaders take stock of the various announcements coming out of the Trump administration, the Chinese and Russian presidents have held a video call, which is reported to have lasted 95 minutes. Well, during their call, President Vladimir Putin is reported to have called President Xi Jinping a dear friend, and the two leaders pledged to bring bilateral ties to greater heights. Well, their conversation comes in the context of warnings from President Donald Trump. These include fresh threats of tariffs on Beijing and the threat of, quote, big trouble for Moscow if it doesn't strike a deal to end the war in Ukraine. Let's take a listen.
Dear President Xi Jinping, dear friend, I'm sincerely glad to welcome you and have the opportunity to have a conversation at the beginning of the year following the established good tradition. I think the past year was fruitful for us. We widely celebrated the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations. We built our ties on the basis of friendship, mutual trust and support, equality and mutual benefit. These connections are self-sufficient, independent of domestic political factors and the current global situation.
Okay, President Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin speaking there. Well, we're joined now by Victor Gao, former translator to Chinese President Deng Xiaoping and Vice President of the China Center for Globalization. We're also joined by Thomas Pickering, former U.S. ambassador to Russia and the United Nations. You served both under the Clinton and Bush administrations. Great to have you both with us, gentlemen. We understand these two presidents spoke just the day after President Trump was sworn in. So we're talking about Tuesday. What does it tell us, do you think, that these two men felt it was necessary to have this conversation the day after President Trump was sworn in? Victor Gao, let me put that to you first.
Thank you very much. I think the real context of the phone call between President Xi Jinping of China and President Putin of Russia is within the overall context of the imminent Chinese New Year. And I think the call is based on goodwill and best wishes for each other's countries and each other's people. And this also reflects that China-Russia relations are really built on solid foundation, and the two countries treat each other with mutual respect and is eager to promote bilateral relations in all areas for mutual benefit. And now this becomes especially important in this very turbulent world of today, especially after President Trump went into the Oval Office for his second term. Because President Trump, who is very controversial both at home as well as abroad, is eager to throw his weight around. But that may not be the best way to solve bilateral relations between countries. And for China and Russia, they definitely need to compare notes with each other and stand firm on matters of principle and deal with the United States as it is, based on equality rather than being overwhelmed or pressurized by President Trump or his administration.
Okay, great. We'll pick up on some of those points in just a moment. Ambassador Pickering, as we've said at the beginning, you served as US ambassador to Moscow. What do you read into the timing of that call between the two presidents?
Well, I think the call was unusual in terms of the rapid amount of publicity it was given. And the focus of that was all on Russia-China harmony. And the foreign affairs advisor to the Russian president in the Kremlin, Yuri Ushakov, went out of his way to make clear that the call was not in response to the Trump inauguration and or what Trump had to say about Russia and China. My sense is that going out of your way to make such a claim is an indication of your concern about the process behind the claim itself, and therefore you are alert to that problem, alert to the question of whether President Trump is trying to split Russia and China or deal with them separately in a way that enhances his leverage. all of which would be smart and part of the art of the deal, which he knows very well. We'll have to wait and see on follow-on activities as to actually how it develops. President Trump has promised an early contact with President Putin. He had one almost a week ago with President Xi. So you can see the priority that has been assigned, at least in protocol terms, to how and in what way he intends to try to move with these two leaders, and how and what way it appears, at least, that he would not be happy were the two leaders to, if I could put it this way, gang up against him.
Okay, and you know, just picking up on what the Chinese president himself said, he said that both leaders needed to, quote, cope with the uncertainty of the external environment. I mean, coming the day after President Donald Trump's inaugurated, that does suggest that there is some concern about President Trump's return. But Victor Gao, let me put this to you. How often do the two men speak, in fact?
Well, I remember President Putin of Russia and Chinese President Xi Jinping have been talking with each other and meeting with each other for multiple times over the past several years. And I think their very frequent meeting, visiting Moscow by President Xi Jinping and visiting Beijing by President Putin, for example, is really a firm indication of mutual respect of each other and understanding of each other, treating each other as equal, rather than try to position one above the other side. This is, as I mentioned, very, very important. Now, both China and Russia need to deal with President Trump and his administration separately. And from the Chinese perspective, we actually welcome some of the positive remarks that President Trump has been making in the past several days. And if Trump really wants to launch another round of very heavy-handed tariff war, it will not crumble China, because the tariffs will not be paid by China. The tariffs will be paid by the American consumers. Eventually, it's a tax on the American people. It's one of the reasons why inflation may be running away, causing a lot of domestic pressure. China wants to cooperate with the United States to help lowering the consumer pricing for the American people for their benefit. So I hope President Trump and his advisors and cabinet members will sooner or later realize that China is not an enemy of the American people, and China wants to get along with the United States on equal terms. And President Trump already said he wants to visit China within 100 days of his inauguration. Personally, I hope President Trump will visit China sooner. And I even hope, that's my personal hope, that President Trump visiting China, meeting with President Xi Jinping, and they will also meet with President Putin and President Zelensky of Ukraine in Beijing together. This will really be the best place and the best format for Russian-Ukraine peace negotiation, monitored by China and the United States, by their heads of state at the same time, and observed by all the other relevant countries, their heads of state or heads of government. And that probably will speed up the process of ending the war in Ukraine, as President Trump promised when he was still running for the presidency. And that will be one of the greatest achievements that any president, including President Trump, can expect to make.
Sure. Okay, we'll come back to Ukraine in just a moment. I just want to sort of turn to you, Ambassador Pickering, and ask you, when we heard President Xi and President Putin saying they wanted to, quote, deepen their alliance, I just wondered whether you think there's anything to be read into that, and what you think the deepening of this already strong alliance might actually involve.
Well, I think that obviously their economic connection is very important. China, at the present time, in the view of many, is going through a period of emerging from economic hardships. We'll have to wait and see how that actually develops. The trade level is $250 billion, roughly, just slightly in favor of China, but it is important, and the very heavy dependence on China on Russian fossil fuel is a very significant part of that trade relationship. There are reports that while China may not be providing weapons for Ukraine, China may be providing important components for weapons and important machinery for the manufacturing of weapons. We'll again have to wait and see. But it is quite clear with the annual timing of this, it may also be fortuitous, if I could put it that way, for Russia and China further to solidify their relationships in the sense that they may be concerned that the Trump process is one of creating leverage through preponderance of influence, whether it is tariffs or threats that one or the other will regret not moving in the direction that President Trump would like to see them move, and therefore create a problem for the two of them that they are seeking now to inoculate the international community and themselves against, if we can phrase it that way, and as a result conduct a diplomacy on a triangular basis in which the unity of two is more significant than the capacity of the one to do some diplomatic splitting. We'll have to say, but the notion of some of the sensitivities, if I could put it this way, in the public arguments are interesting indications that people are remarking that what you suspect is not true, we're really stronger than you think, and that is often an approach to a problem that belies the underlying concerns and promotes them rather than the other way around. We'll just have to wait and see. President Trump is a master of surprise and a master of unpredictability, and that may well be in part how and in what way he intends to conduct this relationship. Finally, many in the U.S. are afraid that President Trump's immediate declaration of a 24-hour cessation of the war between Russia and the Ukraine means that he will lean very heavily on President Zelensky to capitulate and very heavily on his much vaunted admiration for President Putin as part of the relationship he wishes to develop. Again, it's too early, I think, to tell, but I think around the world and with the three, there are certain sensitivities, if I could put it this way, to the areas of leverage and weakness in diplomacy, which may well be an important characteristic of this particular set of conversations and the unusual publicity given to it in the diplomatic sphere.
Victor Gower, there are some analysts who say that the war in Ukraine has brought Russia and China closer together. And I'm just wondering if you agree with that, and whether you think it's not, however, a relationship without some sort of risk and some hazard. Because, I mean, I don't know if you think they're entirely aligned, Russia and China, when it comes to the desired outcome for Ukraine. What are your thoughts?
Well, with or without the Ukrainian war, China and Russia are close to each other, and the expectation is that they will further close the ranks and promote their cooperation. Why? Because it's absolutely in both China's interest and the Russians' interest. We have a long border, 4,300 kilometers. It used to be one of the most heavily armed borders in the world. Now, the China-Russian border is not armed. People can cross the border back and forth with minimum hassle, with a lot of convenience. Thousands of people do that every day. And I think this bodes well for China-Russia relations in the long term. And this is also one of the pillars upon which Eurasian security in the long term need to be built upon. We want to see the end of the Ukrainian war. We do not want to see Ukraine being violated as a member of the United Nations. We hope the UN Charter will be applied to Ukraine in its entirety. However, on the other hand, the war needs to come to an end. Ceasefire through mutual agreement, hopefully promoted by big countries like the United States and China and others. And it is encouraging to hear and to see President Biden President Trump or President-elect Trump at that time wanted to end the war as quickly as possible. It may be more difficult than he originally thought, but I think we need to give President Trump all the support he needs to achieve ending the war in Ukraine. I personally believe if President Trump can play a major role in ending the war, he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize.
Sure, but when you say pressure on Russia and Ukraine to end the war in Ukraine, is China actually placing any pressure? Do you think behind the scenes President Xi is saying to President Putin, this has got to come to an end? What sort of a conversation do you think they're having, Mr. Gao?
Well, first of all, in the last few days of the Biden administration, the former Secretary of State, Blinken, publicly acknowledged that China did play a major role in convincing Putin that nuclear warheads should not be used in the war in Ukraine. I personally believe this is one of the biggest contributions China have been playing behind the scene, urging both Russia and Ukraine to stop the war as quickly as possible through peace, through negotiation, through diplomacy, and emphasizing that no country, including Russia or Ukraine or any other country, should ever dare to use the nuclear weapon. I personally believe this is the greatest contribution China has been making for this particular situation, because the war in Ukraine does have all the ingredients for escalation from a conventional war into a nuclear war. It's no child's play. It's a real serious stuff. And we do not want to save Ukraine by destroying mankind. We want to save Ukraine as well as saving mankind from the menace and the destruction of a nuclear war. This is what China really cares about. China looks at the jugular, and the biggest concern for China is this Ukrainian war running out of control and escalate from a conventional war to a nuclear war. And China wants to do whatever it can to stop that from escalating into a nuclear war. I think mankind in the future generations will be grateful for what China has been doing. Even though China does not go to CNN and BBC to talk about what it has been doing, but the work is real and the achievement is very solid, to be acknowledged already by former Secretary of State Blinken publicly.
So, Mr. Gao, do you think that China thinks that Russia was justified in invading Ukraine?
Well, that's for history to decide. I think no country has any right to maximize its security to cause a threat to other country. Now, the war in Ukraine reminds me of what the United States and President Kennedy did in 1962. The former Soviet Union wanted to base missiles in Cuba. Cuba was a sovereign country. The former Soviet Union was a sovereign country. But why should the United States rose up and oppose that? Why should President Kennedy be ranked as one of the greatest presidents in U.S. history? Because President Kennedy did the right thing. He forced the former Union to withdraw missiles from Cuba because the United States reasonably believed that the Soviet-based missile in Cuba would constitute a threat to the United States. So Russia may have reasons to believe that if Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, their survivability and security will be fundamentally threatened. That's why Russia has been saying, over my dead body, if Ukraine wants to become a member state. So we need to be very, very clever in walking around that big minefield and try to assure Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity without involving Ukraine as a member state. That's, I think, the deal breaker. If Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, Russia will never tolerate that prospect.
Okay, well, it sounds like China's got a lot of value to add to the negotiations and developments moving forward. I'd just like to turn the page and move on to another subject, because, of course, there's a new US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, often described as a China hawk. Before we get on to the China dimension, let me turn to you, Ambassador Pickering. I'd just like to ask you how you think his appointment will be perceived in Moscow and what you think he brings to the table with regards to Washington-Moscow relations.
I think that Moscow will certainly wish carefully to look at how and in what way former Senator Marco Rubio conducts the policy toward their country. President Putin has in many ways attempted to exploit differences with the United States to promote his own perpetuation in office on the one hand, and to unify his people around the Ukraine war in the other. I agree with Mr. Gao's conclusions that China has the capacity to play a very important role both in the opposition to any use of nuclear weapons, which could lead to a catastrophe for the world community, and secondly, I believe to play a useful and constructive role with the United States in seeking an end to the Ukraine war on a basis that is fair and balanced rather than tilted extraordinarily toward one side or another. This is a major diplomatic challenge, and it is a critical problem. And the two questions are in some ways interlinked in a way that we need to be very, very careful about trying to exploit in the direction of seeking advantage over one or a number of parties. The notion that the three could act in concert is, put it this way, certainly desirable, if at the present time probably highly unlikely. But could two act together in a way that does not provoke a catastrophic reaction from the third and begins a process of dealing with world problems on a negotiated basis? Something that we can cast our mind back to Henry Kissinger and how and in what way he opened up the relationship with the People's Republic of China is in itself an important lesson that we should continue to study and continue to find ways usefully to use. And I'm very pleased that Mr. Gao has been so forthright in talking about a Chinese commitment to the question of a peaceful diplomatic end to the war in Ukraine, and one that is balanced and fair, something that the Russians have reminded us of as the conversation between President Xi and President Putin took place, and there were comments outside and among observers that this in one way or another was a process that would work to the disinterest of one country in favor of another country. I believe that that concern and that set of problems is an important thing for us to keep in mind as we look at how and in what way to convert the use of force, which has not produced useful results, to the use of diplomacy, and how and in what way that can begin to bring together the questions of equity, fairness, the end of the conflict, and the avoidance of catastrophe.
Okay, and obviously in this important triangular relationship between Moscow, Beijing, and Washington, there will be Marco Rubio, as we were saying, the new US Secretary of State. Mr. Gao, when you hear people described as being China hawks, I mean, it does get used quite a lot as an expression, but I'm wondering what goes through your mind when you hear that, and how do you think Beijing views the appointment of Mr. Rubio?
First of all, personally, I would like to congratulate Secretary of State Rubio upon his confirmation by the Senate. Secondly, I wish him all the good luck and best wishes in promoting peace and maximizing the benefits for the American people as well as people in the world. Now, third point from my side is I hope he will visit China personally as quickly as possible because he has never been to China. He doesn't know China from his experience. He needs to see China, hear about China, listen to China, and taste China, and really understand better what China is in order to come up with real advices for President Trump as to how China-US relations need to be structured and promoted. Suffice it to say between China and the United States, whether Rubio is the Secretary of State today or otherwise, for example, there is this inevitability of peace between our two countries. Why? Because war is not and should not be an option. War between China and the United States will not be a conventional war. It will be a nuclear war. It will be Armageddon for mankind. All of us need to do our best to urge both China and the United States from going in that direction of a war. China does not want to have a war with the United States. China wants to have peace with the United States. Only those extreme hostile elements in the US government who may want to have a war with China. So if we rule out war, then what we have is the inevitability of peace. I want to talk to former Senator and now Secretary of State Rubio. Listen to me. There is inevitability of peace between China and the United States, and you need to promote that inevitability of peace between our two countries to make both China and the United States great nations in the world, together with all the other about 200 nations in the world. That's the highway, rather than, for example, accusing China for nothing and try to knock down China, which is a mission impossible. No one can knock down China without consequences. And I truly believe in this inevitability of peace between China and the United States. And I want to see President Trump and his cabinet members do the right thing in nurturing and promoting China-US friendship and cooperation.
I just want to ask you, Mr. Gao, about another possible source of tension between China and the United States. It involves the Panama Canal. And of course, we've heard President Trump mention this on multiple occasions, seizing control of the Panama Canal. And he says he wants to do this because the canal's operators have ceded part of the control of the operation of the Panama Canal to China. That's something that Panama denies. I mean, how does China see all of this?
From my personal perspective, I just hope someone will walk up to President Trump and tell him the real truth about the Panama Canal. The history is well known for all of us, for mankind as a whole. And President Trump needs to be reminded that China is the biggest exporting country in the world. China is the biggest shipping nation in the world. If you look at any other ports in the world, China probably is the #1 shipper. One way or another, directly or indirectly, including Panama Canal. That doesn't mean China runs Panama Canal or operates the Panama Canal. China probably is just a user, a customer for Panama Canal. Whether Panama Canal will be run continuously by the Panama side or otherwise, China will still be one of the, if not the biggest customer of the passage through the Panama Canal. China does not own Panama Canal, does not run Panama Canal, does not dictate terms to the Panama Canal. It's a simple fact that China is just a customer. And I hope President Trump will realize that if you look at the 10 largest container ports in the world, 7 of the 10 are located in China. So does that mean that U.S. wants to control the container ports in China? 7 of the 10 largest container ports? No, be reasonable. Let's promote trade. Let's promote peaceful use of the Panama Canal rather than using the century, 100-year-old doctrine of seizing that port in order to use it. That's probably out of fashion, and I hope the United States will abide by the international law under President Trump, as well as going forward.
Ambassador Pickering, I know it's not exactly your area of expertise, and it's unfair perhaps to spring questions about the Panama Canal on you, given that we've invited you to talk about Russian affairs. But do you think there is a bit of a misunderstanding in Washington about, what to do next with regards to the Panama Canal?
Well, I did serve as ambassador to El Salvador in a time of war and crisis, so I have some interest in and some relationship to the area. I was quite astonished the Panama Canal came up in the last month or two. I found that there was a certain, put it this way, obliviousness to the treaty relationships and the arrangements that had been made in the Carter administration for the successful operation of the Panama Canal under Panamanian leadership and control. And they made a wise decision in terms of how and in what way they organized the transfer of the assets to Panama. And I believe that they have continued. There is concern in the United States, as you might suspect, over the fact that one or a number of the ports at the one end of the canal, specifically the Atlantic end, may be under the administration of a Chinese-owned firm, and some feeling of doubt and uncertainty there. So far, I've seen no evidence other than the replaying, if I could put it that way, of the suspicions, some of which comes out of the tensions that have developed between the United States and China. I believe unnecessarily, but I believe now is the time, as I hope and believe Mr. Gao has made clear, that we should be talking more intensively with each other, speaking about a wide range of problems. I see that the call that President Trump-elect made to President Xi touched on Taiwan, fentanyl, and tariffs. Those are not subjects that necessarily are easy, but it is important to communicate, and it's very important to listen. And it's very important to derive from that thoughts and ideas about how and in what way issues that are contentious can be discussed in the direction of finding answers to those. I had the onerous duty of going to Beijing to explain how and in what way we made the colossal mistake of bombing their embassy in Belgrade years ago. The conversations took place. They were not easy, but at the end of the day, the US and China agreed that we would each settle claims of a monetary character over the damage that was done to our diplomatic buildings in China and to China's diplomatic buildings in Belgrade, and hopefully not repeat the question. So I believe we have records in the past of how and in what way we can use diplomacy to resolve problems. And I say once again, we do not have useful records of success in using force to deal with issues and threats to use force in Canada, in Greenland, in the Panama Canal, and elsewhere, in my view, and maybe I should say here, with the greatest respect against Taiwan, are things that we should try to avoid, just as we are certainly trying to avoid any support of the United States for declarations of independence by Taiwan. The U.S. is clearly very much still bound in the Shanghai Communique and the important arrangements that were put in place there. And we hope that we and the People's Republic of China can get along and enhance that particular basis for dealing with those issues about which both sides have strong differing views, but differing views that are not, in my view, totally oblivious to the possibility of reconciliation through more intensive diplomatic contact.
Okay, let me just turn finally to Victor Gao, give you a chance to respond to some of those topics, notably on the issue of Taiwan, which was mentioned there by Ambassador Pickering. I mean, do you see any major developments during the course of these next 4 years of the Trump administration with regards to next steps or how things unfold on the island of Taiwan?
First of all, let me convey my greetings and respect to Ambassador Pickering. I believe Ambassador Pickering is highly regarded by the Chinese diplomatic community here in Beijing. Secondly, the exact legal status of Taiwan is very clear. It's carved in stone. It's carved in the Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation, which are the pillars of the ending of the Pacific War and Asia-Pacific War, leading to the unconditional surrender of Japan. Because between 1895 to 1945, Japan was sitting on Taiwan, and Japan was forced to surrender Taiwan back to China as part of the unconditional surrender terms in 1945. So no one wants to change or shake or topple the pillars of the international order upon which the world peace and security were based ever since 1945. I believe President Trump knows about that, and the US government knows about that, even though in recent years there has been tendency of the United States to try to hollow out the one China policy. But allow me to make one assurance. No one in the world, no country in the world, no force in the world can ever change the fact that there is only one China and Taiwan is part of China. If anyone indulges in the fantasy that he or she can really change Taiwan into a separate, independent country away from China, that's wishful thinking. That's really unrealizable. It's a mission dead before it is given birth. So I think let's be realistic, let's be pragmatic. I hope and I truly believe President Trump will not view China as an arch enemy, because if he tries to position China as an enemy of the United States for his second term of the presidency, President Trump's second term of the presidency will be a failure, because no one should ever indulge in the fact that he can topple China or defeat China within 4 years. Therefore, I hope President Trump will deal with China as a friend, as a partner, as some country which have tremendous amount of resources to help lowering the inflation pressure in the United States and creating maximum pressure, maximum benefits for the people in the United States, and enable China and the United States to get along with each other, respecting each other, including in dealing with Taiwan. On the Chinese side, there is no rush. For example, there is no deadline of 2025 or 2027 on two preconditions. One is that no one in Taiwan really wants to declare independence. Secondly, no foreign country wants to be stupid enough to, for example, send troops to Taiwan or establish diplomatic and military government-to-government cooperation with Taiwan, which is a complete violation of the one China policy. Let's be reasonable, and let's eventually work towards peaceful reunification, no matter how long it may take.
Okay, well, you've had the last word. Victor Gao, very much appreciate those observations, and looking forward to speaking to you and to Ambassador Thomas Pickering as we watch developments unfold during the next 4 years of the Trump administration. Thank you both very much indeed. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has reiterated his threat to impose tariffs on a number of countries. Well, the president is mulling a 10% levy on imports from China, which could come into force as soon as the 1st of February. Well, Trump also plans to slap Canada and Mexico with tariffs to the tune of 25%. Well, in response to Trump's plans to impose a 10% tariff on Chinese imports, Beijing has warned that there are no winners in a trade war.
We have repeatedly stated China's position on this issue. We have always believed that there are no winners in a trade war or a tariff war. China remains firmly committed to safeguarding national interests.
Okay, well, we're joined now by Everett Eisenstadt, former Deputy Director of the National Economic Council under President Donald Trump, also a partner at the law firm Squire Patton Boggs. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. This tariff threat, which applies at the moment to China, the European Union, Canada, Mexico, I mean, what sort of a time frame might we be looking at here? When do you think these tariffs might take effect?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's been, the $1 million question now for a couple of months, even prior to President Trump being sworn into office. I would suspect they could be fairly quick. There are actually some statutory tools that would enable the president to put these tariffs into place quickly. They may differ depending on whether they're tariffs on Canada, Mexico, or China. As you know, there's currently tariffs on China under Section 301 investigation. Those could be brought up relatively quickly, which is something that President Biden did as well. The tariffs on Mexico and Canada would require a different authority. There's no existing template or tariffs in place, so we'd have to use a different authority. And the one that's most likely, the candidate would be the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which could go into effect fairly quickly. Whether it's going to be February 1st or a little bit thereafter, we'll wait and see. There's some extenuating circumstances that may merit delay, and there's some other developments that we've watched very closely just in the past couple of days that would be relevant.
Well, some of the countries that are threatened by these looming tariffs are, of course, natural, long-standing US allies. Just remind us, why is President Trump so aggrieved? Why is he making threats of this kind against countries that are, by any standards, friends of the United States?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's even deeper than, it's not just President Trump. I think this is a trend we've been seeing in international economic policy for a few decades, starting probably under President Obama with the kind of fraying of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where we could not get support in the Congress for that. And candidly, I think part of the reason is dissatisfaction with international institutions being able to deliver on some of the commitments and promises about a rules-based trading system. The president perceives there's some inequities, and he feels like the trade deficit is demonstrative of those inequities, and he feels that tariffs are a good tool for a number of different purposes, and one of those purposes is to remedy unfair trading practices. So that's a big part of it. But there's other rationales as well that we can discuss. It's quite a broad shift in U.S. policy. The tariffs would be used so frequently for so many different purposes.
Yeah, I mean, some of the language used by President Trump is that some of these countries have abused their trading relationship with the United States. You've used the word unfair. Donald Trump's used that word as well, saying, you know, obviously there needs to be some sort of a rebalance, a revisiting of the trade relationships. So if you're one of those countries that's got these looming tariffs hanging over it, what can you do about it? Is it still too late to take action and try to meet his demands?
No, not at all. And I think it's useful for both, any stakeholder, but governments and even private sector to think about the tariffs are very relevant, but there's a number of other developments that are happening simultaneously that could impact international business flows. And if you go into the executive order that was released his first day in office, there's kind of a roadmap there of areas for review and revision, and kind of, as Peter Navarro had said, laying kind of the foundational elements of what we may see from President Trump. And it's broad. It's broader than tariffs. For governments, there's opportunities both for enhancing the relationship with the United States. The executive order talked about the potential for new sectoral or bilateral trade agreements, which is something we didn't see under President Biden. So there's a big scope there. There's both. So I think there's both risk and opportunity, but it certainly merits an important and careful look at all these different elements that are moving and being engaged. Because if you're not engaged, then you can only simply react. But if you are engaged, you might be able to help, effectuate the outcome.
Just before we crossed to you, we heard a Chinese government spokesperson saying there are no winners in a trade war. And I just want to sort of unpack that a little bit more, because there is a risk, isn't there, of tariffs actually boomeranging and damaging the United States economy, isn't there?
Well, there's certainly a danger of retaliation. I know a number of countries are, considering retaliation. One of the trademarks of the president, and certainly this was true during his first term, is that if their country is willing to engage in a reciprocal trading relationship and a fair trading relationship, he is willing to talk to those governments and work through these problems. He's even, indicated that he's open to discussing the trading relationship with China. Now, there's a frustration that, he believes the Chinese government may not have lived up to their phase one commitments under the first negotiations. So I think that would be the place to start. But if there's a willingness to truly engage in a fair and balanced trading relationship, I think the president will certainly do that.
I mean, do you think there's the possibility here of some sort of collective response to these kind of threats? I mean, let's not forget, there are a lot of Europeans. There are 450 50 million people in Europe, in the European Union, versus 334 million Americans in North America. I mean, could they collectively get together and say enough of this and perhaps impose some measures of their own, which would actually be far more damaging to the United States than they would be damaged by these initial tariffs?
Well, certainly that's, it's certainly possible governments could do that. I'm not sure that would be the best approach. I think that one of the hallmarks of the U.S. economy is that while we are a major market for probably, if not the number one, then the number two market for a lot of exports for many of these countries, whereas we don't rely on exports as much as they do. So I think that the idea that our trade exposure is not as high as some other economies. I'm not sure a collective, response would be productive, but certainly governments can, and will do what they think is best. One thing I did want to note that might be of particular interest for your listeners is that the executive order that came out also called for review of all the existing trade agreements. And I know there's a number of trade agreements with countries in the Middle East and around the world. So those are certainly, if you have equities in those trade agreements or a government from a country with a trade agreement with the United States, that review would be meaningful and something that I think people would want to take part in.
It feels like, we're slightly feeling our way in the dark here, in the sense that it looks like we're talking about tariffs to the tune of about 10% for China as things stand. But during the campaign trail, we heard President Trump talking about 60% tariffs on Chinese imports. I mean, that's a huge swing in percentage terms. And I'm just wondering whether that suggests there's a bit of bluster here, or whether President Trump is shooting from the hip, or whether there really is a strategy.
No, I don't think it's bluster. I think tariffs could go quite high, actually, and it really depends on the reaction. At the end of the day, I believe there will be a negotiated outcome. The question is when and how that will transpire. It won't happen immediately, and if it doesn't happen, then tariffs can remain high. I mean, we've seen under the prior administration, the tariffs that were put in place under President Trump on China have been in place now for 6-7 years. In fact, were even increased under President Biden. So the tariffs can stay in place. There's no automatic reduction or elimination of them. One thing that President Trump has called for is approval of a bill that would enable him to have the authority to engage in reciprocal trade negotiations. I think that is a key word, is this reciprocity, that if you want a tariff of, say 10% of the U.S. market, then you need to have that for your own market. And many governments don't have that. They, in fact, have very high tariffs on U.S. exports or other barriers. So for governments that are willing and to engage in a real dialogue about reciprocal trade, there's a willingness to do that. But it takes two parties, and it's not just going to happen through retaliation. It's going to take meaningful steps forward as well.
Okay, well, we'll keep a close eye on how developments unfold. Meanwhile, thank you very much indeed for your time, Everett Eisenstadt. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Great pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for today's edition of Global News Today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Los Angeles, the entertainment capital of the world, Los Angeles. The cultural hub boasts of more than 300 museums and tourist attractions. And yes, great weather. What to do when in LA? First on the list is, of course, a behind-the-scenes studio tour at the Universal Studios Hollywood. The most popular attraction offers tourists a chance to explore the Hollywood movie studios, including great 3D experience shows. Next is the Walt Disney Concert Hall, found on Grand Avenue in downtown LA. It is designed by Pritzker Prize-winning architect Frank Gehry, with acoustics by Yasuhisa Toyoda, and has been praised by concertgoers for its stunning architecture and extraordinary sound. The concert hall is home to the renowned Los Angeles Philharmonic and the Los Angeles Master Chorale. Museums and art hubs in LA are also known for housing some of the world's most renowned collection. One may find a repertoire of masterpieces, including works of Vincent van Gogh. For fans of Hollywood entertainment, movies, television, and music, Los Angeles is the place where one will most likely see a celebrity. The secret is to dine at the restaurants often visited by the stars, such as the famous Wolfgang Puck at the Hotel Bel Air. LA is also a great destination for those who love to shop. Popular shopping centers and little kiosks around the neighborhood are frequently visited for great bargain finds. For the ultimate window shopping experience, visit the world-famous strip of stores along Beverly Hills, which is known as a place of luxury and style. Tired of the usual ways of discovering LA? Have a different view of Hollywood by heading to the Runyon Canyon Park, one of the most popular hiking areas in LA. One may also find quieter spots to rest and relax in LA. From Malibu to South Bay are the best beaches in Southern California. The 2-mile-long Santa Monica Beach is also worth the visit, as well as the Santa Monica Pier, the Pacific Park Amusement Park, and the Heal the Bay Aquarium. A true city of champions, one should also catch a game when in LA. Visit the Dodgers Stadium, one of the great cathedrals of Major League Baseball and a popular Instagram location. The ballpark has already hosted 8 World Series, and the Dodgers have won 4 World Championships.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Istanbul, definitely a glory of the world. Istanbul bridges 2 continents, marries civilizations that highlights the best of the Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman empires. Take a look and see. Perhaps the most popular among tourists is taking the Bosphorus cruise in Istanbul. They say a trip to the city won't be complete without taking this route. It provides a majestic overview of the city, taking both European and Asian shores. You'll see century-old places and mansions to marvel at. There are also several options of cruises to take for your convenience. The Hagia Sophia is definitely a sight to see too. It's a splendid church-turned-mosque-turned-museum that's considered one of the world's greatest architectural treasures. Also head over to the Archaeology Museum in Istanbul. It is considered one of the city's hidden gems, displaying one of the world's richest collections of classical antiquities. Here, you'll find the marvelous sarcophagus of Alexander the Great, depicting important phases of his life, the blue-tiled Karaman Marab, the beautiful tiled pavilion, and the Treaty of Kadesh, which is known as the world's earliest surviving peace treaty. When it comes to shopping, Istanbul has its Grand Bazaar. You can go bargain hunting to your heart's delight. It is over 500 years old, but still one of the largest covered bazaars in the world. Locals visit the place every day to shop and bargain like pros. The Grand Bazaar is also known for its carpets, leather, ceramic, jewelry, plus souvenirs you can bring home. Not to be missed are the local markets that will allow you a taste of different cultures of continents. Turkey's kitchen is in fact known to be the richest of all. Their dishes are known to be made with only fresh produce. Plus, you can buy the ingredients firsthand at the local markets. Then, of course, you can't miss the Galata Tower. It is one other way to see the best of the city. You'll get a 360-degree panoramic view of Istanbul. Its very high tower also has a restaurant and cafe for you to dine in at the 9th floor. Feel free to enjoy the view and the food too. Definitely a great way to see, experience, and absorb the beauty that is Istanbul.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.